Okay, let's start off. Ding. I'm Bill Graham. I'm the president of the Rotary Dare to Be Great Global eClub. And today is 19 October 2024, and I declare this meeting of our eClub to be open. Okay, the topic for today's meeting is closing the education gap. In particular situations. We're not going to be talking about closing the education gap where the problem is access, because you have two very distinct situations with regards to education. You have people that don't have any access to education resources at all. And that's a very different type of a solution needed than you have in those areas where education resources are available, but they're not being able to be taken advantage of. Uh, Case in point, a year ago, May, in Germany, the newspapers were full of the headline that one out of every four German fourth graders can barely read. Earlier this year in the United States, there's an exam that's given throughout the country. It's called the National Report Card, and that reported that 40% of American fourth graders could barely read. So we see this problem in education in developed countries around the world, and we'll get into exactly why in a minute. But I wanted to distinguish between the two situations, one where there is there's some kind of education available, education resources available, but it's not working for a significant share of the population of those particular countries. And we have the situation where just there's no education available, or it's unaffordable, so it's not available to those people. And as a result, it's whether it's because you can't afford it or because there just isn't any. The bottom line is education is not accessible to those people. Hi, Atavia. Glad to see. Are you in Canada now? Yeah. Okay. We'll talk later. And so we want to distinguish those two so that because the solutions that are needed are so different. Okay, so in the last month and a half, 2 months, we've had a lot of talks about education, in particular artificial intelligence in education, and we talked about three basic categories of needs that are being recognized with regards to education. One is we have an education system, starts usually with kindergarten, and goes up through the end of secondary school, which in many countries is around 10 to 12 years. And then there's a post secondary school, tertiary level, university, college level, that goes beyond that. And then there's the rest of life. We, up until a few decades ago, basically your education sort of came to a stop when you left formal schooling environment, and then you just lived off whatever you had learned up until that point, and you only learned a minor amount of stuff for the rest of your life. But that situation has dramatically changed, and now the world is changing so fast that what one needs to know to be successful is changing as well. And so we have that uh, basically. Oh, and then the other thing is the formal education system, as I say, typically starting with kindergarten. There's the issue of early childhood education. And early childhood education is generally seen as preparing a child to be successful in the formal education system, in the system that starts with kindergarten. But as we'll see, that is a special situation on its own, where it's the source of much inequality in the world. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so In the discussions that we had over these last couple of months, we discussed here the possibility of using artificial intelligence to create equality in the preparation for school. Because the studies show us, especially in countries like the United States, and I'm sure the same applies to most other developed countries, that the number one cause of education outcome disparities is early childhood preparation. In other words, children who enter kindergarten and are up to 2 years behind in mental maturity and verbal vocabulary. And then we say, okay, now you're all in school. Now you're all equal. Now we're going to teach you to read, and we're going to probably do it phonetically on the assumption that you already speak the language, so that if we can now show you that this combination of letters is pronounced like this, you're going to recognize the word and know what it means. But for these children who don't speak the language or don't have the verbal vocabulary skills, it doesn't help them to hear the word because they don't know what it means even when they hear it. So this is a major problem, and especially where you have high degrees of migration of children who are perhaps growing up in families where they don't speak the main school language. And correct me if I'm wrong, Osita, but in Africa, the problem is compounded by the fact that there are dozens and dozens of languages spoken in many countries. And as a result, those children start the formal school year speaking a language other than the language that is spoken in school. And Huma, you've got the same situation in Pakistan, where you've got about 7 or 8 major languages. Is that
Yes, we
correct?
do have. We do have. Yes.
Yeah. So the challenge here is, how do we prepare children coming out of these diverse situations? How do we prepare them to go into a system where everybody's expected to be equal? Everybody's expected to be at the same level moving forward.
And
So
one of
we,
the biggest challenge in our country.
pardon?
It is one of the biggest challenge in our country when it comes to education.
Right. And you know what's very interesting here is I worked for a number of years in Switzerland, and in the Swiss German part of Switzerland. And it's interesting that they speak a dialect called Swiss German that is quite different from the High German, if you would. My wife, who is German, would spend with the kids. They'd spend the summer with me down in Switzerland, and we would usually rent space in in a farm outside of Zurich. And so the kids would have a lot of space to run around. But for my wife, it was very frustrating because she could not speak to the woman that was running the farm, because my wife didn't understand Swiss German, and that woman didn't understand High German. So they were that different. But where it really becomes interesting is when the children go to school. Children in Switzerland lose the 1 year in school because that year is used to help them learn High German, so that and then from there they continue on the same as children in Austria or Germany.
But at least they're addressing this issue that they are taking 1 year and they are making them learn the language.
Correct.
Here we can have that period even.
Yep. Well,
Say,
the problem gets more complicated because you have in in many countries where there's a high migration, where there's a high percentage of
mm,
children of migration backgrounds, it's the question of how many languages are spoken. The I have a friend of mine who was a teacher in Frankfurt, Germany, in a high school, and he was reporting that he had a class 1 year in which more than a dozen, the students spoke more than a dozen different languages. And so you just have to imagine as a teacher there what to do. Yes, Lisa.
Yes, no, I just wanted to put that out there. I'm here with as one of the founding members of UnityNet International,
Mhm.
and we are building nonprofit collaboratives, especially in the conflict zones. where, yes, many languages are spoken. I've been compiling a translator's page so that each of these languages is honored and its speakers, well, I'll be honest, in the groups on the ground, in the community-based organizations, I have found that a great many of the people working there speak a minimum of 3 different languages, and some are true polyglots where it's 6 or more. So moving forward on this, through just what we're doing and gathering the locals in who speak these different languages, we not only honor the culture of that language, which of course, being with UNESCO, I have to do. At the same time, we give those options and the resources by which to be able to instruct others in other languages that are common in that region. As you yourself made commentary on, we have a lot of mass migration and displacement going on in all these nations, especially sub-Saharan Africa. And as a result, getting these to come together to work in concert with each other, using the Sustainable Development Goals as well. Yeah, at first it is a challenge, but through the UnityNet infrastructure of hundreds of pages, we are in positions where we can give the tools that all of these can use to move forward, like translation software, especially, although translation software for certain languages is very deficient. One of the most common is the Kiswahili. Kiswahili is very similar to American English in the fact that it is under constant change. American English constantly comes up with new words, new phrases to represent the constant changes in culture, which is what I imagine you already work with there, where you are. And I'd be more than happy to discuss the process with you because we're already getting inquiries from Central and Eastern Asia on this program itself. And as their outreach director, that's part of my job.
Right.
I don't want to advertise. This is Bill's.
Let me hear from Kurt. Let me hear from Kurt, and then I just want to wrap up the aspect here on this early childhood aspect, and especially the language aspect. We'll spend just a couple of minutes on that, and then we'll move on because we want to make sure that we're not at 11:30 trying to first get to our topic of the day, which is the pilot projects. Kurt, please.
Yeah, real quickly about some of what was just discussed by Lisa, Allison, and everybody else. Anise, excuse me, I'm sorry. Is that Sam Beard's work is so vital to be able to prepare people that are under 3 years old for being able to learn. This is just the aspect of being able to learn, having people sing to them, read to them, tell them stories, talk to them, whatever, having so many million words, I think it's about 30 million words spoken to them and sung to them in a way that they are then, their brain is channeled. It's all the nerve endings are synapsing and everything else. And it's a beautiful experience. I've met with Sam a number of times. He's consulted with 6 or 8 presidents. I know it's at least 6.
You need to be our liaison then, because we need to really get somebody like that involved, because the 30 million words you're speaking of, that's the famous gap that the Bloomberg studies discovered, that between the working and welfare class families and let's say middle and upper class families, by the end of the 3rd year of life, the difference, it can be up to 30 million words. And that same study is what showed that those children, when they enter kindergarten or 1st grade, whatever their first year of formal schooling is, they're up to 2 years behind in verbal vocabulary skills and mental maturity. Now, the mental maturity aspect, I've been trying to figure that out, but that's that general knowledge of just, how much have you been exposed to? And the problem is very often the children of working and welfare class families have been exposed to very, very little because either the parents are working all the time, or we have a very
Yeah.
high degree of single parent households in that socioeconomic class. And then you've got the language aspect there in terms
They
of,
have they have the they have the two-dimensional aspect because most of these poor people will have a TV on,
yeah,
or they've given a child one of these little things to have in front of their face
yeah.
and just gaze at and not learn a doggone thing or
Well,
whatever.
okay.
And their eyesight is going because it's not being expressed in long vision, so to speak, and
Yeah,
so on
yeah,
and so
yeah.
forth.
However, having said that last part there, the thing that we see that holds the greatest promise, because all the attempts, and I've met with the Quakers, and we have so many movements out there that are trying to deal with the socioeconomic problems of the underclass, if you would, and have failed to have had any really significant impact. Especially when we look at the Philadelphia to Trenton area, where there's a very large Quaker population, and they are very, very engaged at trying to provide that holistic approach. But we have not been able to see any significant, widespread, sustainable improvement there. We can have tons of anecdotal improvements. Here's a project, oh, it's successful. Most of the projects are successful to their local goals, but in terms of changing what the amount of need is from year to year, the change is negligible. Kurt, you wanted to add?
Can I say something?
There's a
Yes.
study that was done in there was a study that was done
Just a minute.
in Finland.
Mhm.
The Finnish study showed that when they gave the homeless housing, let's say attached to any ideas or anything except for the fact that they got to be able to experience a psychological treatment unquestioned. In other words, they didn't have to say, well, I'm an addict or I'm this or I'm that. They just got to be able to be helped, period, helped. And physical, mental, and emotional, everything. They have such a small little incident of homelessness there now. I
Mhm.
mean, it's minuscule.
Mhm.
And so when we model ourselves like that idea of the it's called the universal basic income. When we spread that around, people will have a choice to go after what their heart sings to them to be able to make a living, rather than what the economics
Mhm.
send to them. Like I have a friend he's working as a laborer building roads. This guy is an incredibly bright guy, but he doesn't see a future in being so bright.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of the experiments. There's been so many experiments done on universal basic incomes, and the interesting thing is it shows that rather than being a discouragement to work, that the majority of the subjects in those tests uh, actually demonstrated a greater desire to work because they could then combine whatever they were getting through work with whatever they were getting through the universal basic income, and that combination then allowed them to have a different lifestyle. But in Finland, one of the things we have to realize, Finland went from being a mediocre education country to being the
Actually,
best country in the Western world. But
so
what's but we have to look. They had three elements to their level of improvement. The first was they banned private schools. So they're saying, hey, if you can afford it and you cannot go and just look for the privilege for your child. If you want to improve your child's education, you improve the education system, and it's going to impact your child, but all other children as well. The second thing that they did was they elevated the status of being a teacher. They made it very difficult. To get into the School of Education in most Finnish universities is the most difficult subject to get into, a course of study to get into. In fact, I used to have a subsidiary in Helsinki, and one of the things you would occasionally hear is somebody said, "Oh, they're a doctor," and the response would be, "Oh, you weren't good enough to be a teacher." Huh? It's the prestige value of being a teacher is the ultimate. But the third thing, and the thing that had the greatest impact, is they made preschool available to everyone in Finland, subsidized for those that couldn't afford it. But the idea is they made it available. And the interesting thing is they made it available starting at 6 months of age. Now, you won't find much about it today, but if you go and can find some YouTube videos of maybe 15 years ago or so, 20 years ago, where they described the program, because everybody in the world was interested in how Finland made such massive leaps in their education outcomes. And they said, well, one of the reasons why they put the preschool in starting at 6 months of age is they wanted to reduce the influence of the parents. In other words, their conclusion was the influence of the parents for many children was a negative. Now, not for all, but the problem is if parents, like we see in the United States, parents, the good parents say, hands off the family. You cannot have any influence in what's going on with the family. Well, they're doing okay because they're doing everything needed for their children. But what about the parents who can't? I'm not saying here that they don't want to, but they just can't. They maybe they didn't have the education when they were a child. They didn't have they speak a different language. They've got psychological medical problems. We have a lot of refugees that come from conflict areas that basically have the post-traumatic syndrome. So there's just all kinds of problems where families can't. But because of this hands-off attitude in the U.S., those children never get the help they need. But Finland put that into effect. So by the time their children start first grade, and first grade starts at age 7 in Finland, uh, those children are all equal because those preschool teachers, to be a preschool teacher, you have to have a postgraduate degree, usually in child psychology, and it starts off with only 2 children to a teacher for the first couple of years, and only increases slightly. So by the time you're 6 years old, there's still only 7 students to a teacher. So that teacher,
You are talking about the ratio 1:7
correct.
student teacher ratio.
Yeah. The children are getting incredible attention. So it's interesting because there was a movement in Germany to try to say, hey, let's copy what they did in Finland. Look at how successful this was. But the thing about it is the political parties went and made that feel like, oh, we're going to take all your rights and privileges away. You're not going to be able to have your children be able to go to a private school. You're not going to be able to teach your children the way you want. And so it was all the polls showed that the Germans were against this idea of total preschool, although they now have a much higher percent going to what they call Kita, which is like a preschool. Hilma.
Yeah, I have one question. What system of education they are following, like Reggio Emilia or whatever system? I would like to know this thing. Secondly, when it comes to communication, when you were talking about languages, like it's German or French, it should not be the war of one language against another language. Right now, with this arrival of AI, it should be the understanding and the communication. We have to make communication more easy and accessible for all of us. Recently, I have seen a feature in a mobile app by advertisement of a mobile company. They were showing that one girl was talking in indigenous language, the other was talking in other language, and the mobile was working as an interpreter. So one problem is solved, that if you don't know the language, you can understand the thing via technology. But when it comes to making communication accessible to all, so what do you suggest about this?
Yeah, I'll come, Farzan, I'll come to you in a second, but I just want to respond to this. Um, I had a friend, acquaintance more, who was a teacher in Bulgaria. And one of the issues in Bulgaria is when we look at a lot of the resources, the educational resources that are out there, uh, there's always a delay. If you're in a language that's not widely spoken, the producers of education tools and learning aids and things like this, they're going to make those first available in the languages that are most widely taught because that's where they're going to be able to make the most money. That's where they're going to be able to sell them the most. So, what the results were in Romania was people realized, hey, if I want to be able to get a high paying job later on, the job is going to be in a major spoken language. It's going to be in English or German or another language. So the parents said, we're Bulgarian here and we're proud to be Bulgarian, but we don't want our kids to go to a Bulgarian language school. We want our children to be fluent in a language that they're going to work in later on, and that's basically going to influence their lives. Now, we see here in a number of European countries that the major companies in those countries, their business language in their company is no longer their local language. Their business language is often the global because they're global companies. So they need to be able to have easy conversation. Now, the translation aids, it is mind-boggling how it's improved. If you have not tried OpenAI, ChatGPT, advanced voice translation capability, it is literally so real time. It's absolutely amazing. But that's still not as good as knowing it direct yourself. So that's one of the disadvantages, if you would, there. Now, Farzana, please, you had your hand up for quite a while there. Sorry, it took me.
Okay. Uh, ex- Will, I just want to ask about the as you were discussing about the Finland education system. So I have a question in my mind. Do you recommend that that education system is going successfully, and we should copy some of their things in our education system? What do you recommend as you were discussing in your discussion?
There are some things here. One could argue that eliminating the private schools, because the basic thing is here, as our children and growing up, do we want to have equal opportunity for all children, or do we want to have it that if you're already in the privileged class, that you're able to give that privilege to your children to be have a better start than maybe children who are not in as good a privileged situation? And this is an interesting thing as I had a discussion again with ChatGPT here recently, talking about why is it that when we get into such educational disparities, that there's not more interest in closing the gap, especially the socioeconomic gap. And I recall about 30 years ago, we had a project that we were working on where we were pulling the education associations around the United States, trying to get them to support this initiative that was based on getting better students to help their less successful peers by creating a competition, a very, very aggressive competition among schools. So the idea was that to win, the all the students were helping the weakest because your opportunity to advance the overall school standing was with the students who were least successful. In other words, if a student is at a 40% level, you've got a lot of upward room to improve. But if a student's at a 95% improvement, you don't have as much where you can gain. So we were doing this by creating what graduating class would be able to show the greatest amount of improvement over the previous year's graduating class in a school. That was the rule of measure. And I remember talking to one of the executives of a major teachers association, nationwide teachers association in the United States for a particular subject that everybody is required to learn. And his
Yeah,
comment was, I'm
yes,
against
yes,
this. I don't
Paul,
want
just a
my
minute. Let me go off my call. I'm in a meeting.
Okay. So his answer was, I don't want my 17-year-old daughter helping her future competition. So the question we asked, I saw a study here in New Jersey, and it said that the majority of the middle and upper class in New Jersey don't want to help the children from the lower classes because that will just increase the competition to get into colleges, universities, and the like for their own children. This sort of reminds me of that famous ice skating, and I think it was Olympics or something like that. It happened about 20 years ago, where the boyfriend of one of the top skaters went and smashed the knee of his girlfriend's competition. So there's this mindset here. We got to protect our privilege that we've got, and this is a major problem. So, what can we do about it? Because it's not a question of money. Money is not solving, unless we say money combined with, okay, we're going to have, like Finland, all children from 6 months of age be able to have a fully qualified alternative parent, if you would, who is going to ensure that their children hear those songs that Kurt was talking about, hear the stories. They're just exposed to language at a high degree. The Bloomberg study showed in the United States for those lower socioeconomic categories, not only do they have a deficiency of 30 million, up to 30 million words by the end of the third year, but the most of the words that they hear, because it's not 30 million different words, it's 30 million words. But the problem is what words. And in the lower socioeconomic classes, you're just usually hearing orders. Don't touch that. Keep away from that. Sit quiet. Don't talk. Whatever. And whereas in a higher level, there's more discussion about what's on the news or just answering questions. Why is the sky blue or whatever it is? So they're just hearing a totally different caliber of language. And what they did in Finland is by having really qualified people serving with these children, even if the children are playing and they're just hearing stories and things like this, they're getting that exposure so that by the time they've reached that first school year, they're socialized. But more important than that, in Finland, they taught the children to be independent learners. In other words, they didn't go and say, let me tell you how things work. What they did is saying, why do you think that works like that? And they got the children used to hearing goals, to hearing hey, figure out why this works. Find out what's the story behind that. And then have the children go and figure that out so that now by the time they reach first grade, they're already used to, oh, this is what I have to learn. Let me go learn it. So as a result, homework in Finland is optional. Homework's something you do if you think you need it. If you don't need it, why do it? Right? So what's very interesting is there's a lot of reports that when Finnish students participate in the United States in exchange programs, that teachers have a high degree of frustration because in the United States, homework is almost like a control factor of a teacher. You do this, you do that, because I don't know if I can trust what you're doing unless you do something I
Proper
can see.
schedule for that. They have proper homework schedule for that, which
Right.
teachers have to follow in
Yeah.
US, in Pakistan, everywhere.
Yeah. So, but the basic thing about it is the students from Finland, very often they don't do the homework even when they come to the United States. They say, why do I should do it? I already know that. So this is a little bit. Anyway, we spent way too much time on this first thing. I just want to wrap this part up with the what we had discussed a couple of weeks ago, that artificial intelligence is going to make a huge difference in being able to close that gap in the early childhood, because it's not like sitting a child in front of TV where maybe they pay attention, maybe they don't because it's a one-way communication. But being able to have an entity that is talking to the child, is telling the child stories. But even more important is perhaps telling the children, hey, let's make up a story. What do you think would be an interesting story? Getting those creative, imaginative storytelling here so children develop those skills. And then they can do that in a language that maybe the child is not speaking at home, but the child who's now spending a number of hours per day together with the artificial intelligence is now being exposed to the language that they're going to be learning in later on, but at a very high degree. So understanding numbers, numeracy, and basic literacy, and the socialization skills. You can even, with the child, hey, let's discuss, how do you work together with your friends? Or how do you, because the devices, I talked about the Amazon Echo Show 10, for example, which is a screen on a swivel device with a camera that is able to turn and face whoever's speaking to it. So you could have a group of 4 or 5 children with this, and the camera is going around, and the camera can be saying, stop that. You're doing something that could be harmful to you, or stop fighting with your friend over there. And so you have that, or it can set off an alarm and call the caregiver who might be in the different room to say, hey, you need to come right away. So I saw um, a video talking about the new version of Amazon Alexa, which is going to have advanced AI in it later this month. And in that, they had a collage of pictures, but one of the pictures showed this Echo 10 and a group of children sitting next to it. So they're already thinking maybe that way. But the sky's the limit, because this thing is talking as an equal to the child, starting off with whatever the level of communication that child is at and understands, but where the AI in the back is saying, hey, my goal is, or my mission is to help that child build that vocabulary and build that understanding of how things work in the world, and and not to touch the stove because it could be hot or whatever. So at any rate, that is going to be very exciting, because in the United States last year, we had the Supreme Court, or maybe it was earlier this year, I'm not sure, went and said affirmative action, where universities would make special enrollment opportunities for disadvantaged youth who maybe did not get the opportunity of as good schooling at the primary and secondary level to be able to get into universities. And they said, no, that's illegal. That's not fair. You can't treat children unequal just because they may have had a disadvantaged childhood, or they belong to a racial minority. We see the results this year. The enrollments of people from disadvantaged backgrounds has dropped tremendously this year in universities, many universities around the United States. But the problem was that the students who were accepted into universities in the United States due to affirmative action more often did not complete the university as compared to the general enrollment, because they lacked the preparation to be successful. And as a result, they would end up with the high student loans because they were paying to go to the university, or with loans because they didn't have the money. But now because they didn't complete the education, they don't can't get the jobs that pay enough for them to be able to get out of debt and pay off that loan. So the affirmative action was actually not good for a large number of people that were able to get to university in that fashion. And so what we're seeing here, if you really want to do a useful affirmative action, the place to do it is prior to school. Let's make sure every child entering school is at an equal level and has an equal opportunity to be successful in their further education. And artificial intelligence really holds great promise to be able to close that gap and make that possible. Now, the one of the problems we have with anything about education, educators or the education systems are perhaps one of the least experimental in the world. Educators don't take risks, and for the most part. And so to try to bring widespread change to schools is very difficult. So taking it and saying, oh, no, we're not going to try to change the schools. Let's change the situation before the child gets to the school so they're all equal. And that's where the opportunity would lie. But we're maybe 3 to 6 months away from having those devices like an Echo Show 10 with the vision. It's the real vision part of it is still there. It has face recognition and so forth, but the vision that would enable it to realize, oh, that child's doing something that could be harmful, or this child's doing something that's really great, so I can praise that child for that. That is not quite there yet, although it's coming very fast. Just within the last 2 weeks, that advanced vision's been added, for example, to Microsoft Copilot. And so we will see this. In a certain degree, it's already there in Google Gemini Live, and you probably saw from May that both Google and OpenAI both demonstrated live vision, where they were able to be talking to the AI, but the AI was able to see, so they could say, how many fingers am I holding up, or play a game of rock, scissors, paper, and have the AI know who won and so forth. Okay, so because that's a few months away, we need to wait till that's there, let's say. But another thing we talked about was this thing where educators are afraid, oh, students are only going to use AI to cheat, to not do homework or not learn the lessons. They're just going to let AI do it for them, and therefore not learn. But we described a way in which AI, while you're communicating with it to tell it, okay, help me learn this or help me learn that or whatever, that it's constantly on the side evaluating your communication skills. Did you speak clearly? Did you have to keep correcting yourself because you only gave half the information each time? So it can be evaluating your communication skills, and then on the side advising you, how do you make your communication skills better? How do you be more effective? Now, this is independent, right? You know, whether you're talking to an AI or you're talking to some work colleagues or anybody else out there, did you get your message across clearly? And so this is a great advantage, and AI can be doing that while it's helping you learn other things. It can also be evaluating your critical thinking and your creative thinking. It can say, oh, you asked me some really smart follow-on questions to the discussion we're having, or you contributed some parts that show you're really thinking, or you question stuff that needs to be questioned. And so it can also evaluate your creative and critical thinking skills, and again, coach you on how to be better on those, and then say, oh, you need to pay attention to this. And that's something we really lack. We try to do it, but if a teacher's doing it, they're seeing a particular student as maybe a tiny fraction of the day, are they evaluating a particular student's creative and critical thinking skills, or being able to effectively coach and then be able to track, was their coaching effective? Did that result in improvement to that? And then the last thing here is that's new with ChatGPT o1, that includes the reasoning, where it goes and it takes a look at whatever you're asking, and it analyzes what you're asking and then figures out what are all the different steps I need to do to be able to go find the information, evaluate it, put it together and everything to give you the answer that would be best for that. And so this is the chain of thought. What's the chain of thought or chain of reasoning to give you an answer? And if you've not been working with ChatGPT o1 Preview or Mini, o1 Mini, you need to do that and watch when you've asked for something, watch it go through the steps of thinking about how it's going to attack your question or your comment before it gives an answer. It's quite interesting, and the quality of answers is much higher. The hallucinations are far less. This is really becoming quite amazing in what it's able to do. But the important thing for us is to realize if it knows how to reason, how to take a problem or an issue and to reason through how to best approach that problem or that issue, it can also evaluate our approach. In other words, it can go and analyze what was the thought process that we went through in before, when we asked it questions or we're in a conversation with it. What is the thought process that we went through? What did we leave out? And it can be coaching us to improve how we reason, how we think. So this combination of all of these, that when we're interacting with the artificial intelligence, it can be evaluating those critical skills for us: communication skills, creative thinking, critical thinking, chain of reasoning. It can be evaluating and coaching us to make us better. That would be maybe the greatest contribution that anybody could provide to education, and it applies to everybody at every age. Everybody at every age can benefit. You can be my age. I'm already seeing it's doing it, and saying, "Hey, did you think about this? Did you take that into consideration?" And this can be mind-boggling. But again, this is brand new. The chain of thought that where it's built in. People were doing this with custom prompts and custom instructions for almost 2 years now. But the idea of building it into the system is brand new. So the idea of creating those prompts in a way that it will be analyzing that on a behind the scenes in all of your interactions, and especially here looking at the advanced voice features where I'm able to just talk back and forth like this and have it evaluate my communication, my verbal skills, evaluating my thinking, evaluating my reasoning. It's not quite there. We're maybe on that one. Maybe it's 3 to 12 months before that is going to be matured enough where everybody doesn't have to figure out how do I get the AI to do that for me. It's going to be built into the AI from the get-go, and you just need to turn on a function or not. Okay, so because those two aspects that we're saying, okay, they're not shovel ready, if you would, for us to be able to jump into, that leaves the middle here of how do we close the education gap between, let's say, kindergarten and 12th grade, or 10th to 12th grade or whatever. How do we close that education gap? How do we make it so that children, once they hit a certain point, have the means that they're going to be successful learners through the rest of their life? And part of that is when we're saying close the gap, we have to understand, okay, how big's the gap? And I think here, I'm going to try to see if I share my screen. Okay. We can see here this was a question here of percentage of children at grade level. We can see in the top 10% of primary schools in New Jersey. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
And okay, so here we see the top 10% of schools. We have almost well, more than 91% of students are at grade level on average. Well, what's it look like in the bottom 10% of schools? Is it 70, 60? What percent are at grade level? And what we actually see is it's less than 7%. So when you look at that disparity between schools, and it's not about students within schools, we see either entire schools are successful or entire schools fail. Yeah, you can have a percentage like we have 8% of students and even the best schools are not at grade level, and we've got here about 6% of kids in the worst schools that are at grade level. But by and large, it's either you're in a failing school or you're in a successful school. And so we see this disparity is really huge. So um, the so the question is, how do we close that? How do we get it so that no matter what school you go to, your odds of being and learning to the level that you're expected to learn at are successful. Now, why is this so important? There's a guy, his last name is Rosen. He's a district attorney in California. He did a study on what happens to children based on where they are in their early childhood and whether or not they complete school or don't complete school. Now we see among those schools districts here in New Jersey where you've only got the less than 7% of fourth graders at grade level. The dropout rate in some of those cities is 50%. 50% of the kids do not complete school. And the studies that this district attorney did showed that among students who do not complete school, especially the boys, one out of every three, or pardon me, no, it was 68% of the children who do not complete school, boys spend 1 year in prison before they're 30 years old. Okay, almost two-thirds, two out of three. So if we translate that, what that means here in New Jersey, we've got primary schools where one out of every three 6-year-olds, you're 6 years old and you're just starting school, and one out of every three of those boys is statistically damned to spend a year in prison before they're 30 years old. If that was a disease, this would be a national emergency. We have in those failing schools in New Jersey, there are 73,000 children just in New Jersey in those failing schools. So this is why we really have to do something to close this gap, because that's a drain on our society. If we're having to pay for so many of those young people being in prison, and let's face it, the United States has one of the highest incarceration rates of any country in the world. So if we have to pay for that, if we have to pay for high insurance rates because we have high crime, if we have to pay that the cost of being a victim of crimes, or pay because companies are having to pay more money to protect themselves, so they pass those costs on to the consumers. So there's a big burden to our society due to the failure of education, the failure to prepare a large percentage of our population to be successful contributors to our society rather than to be a liability. So that's part of our goal of how do we do that. The second aspect here is that the world has dramatically changed in the last couple of decades. to where when I was in school, most of my peers, they got out of high school. Very few of them went on to college at that time, but they get out of high school and they would just get a job and they'd say, "Hey, I'm finished learning for the rest of my life." And many of them here were not particularly successful in education and just assumed maybe I'm too stupid to be a successful learner in school, in a school environment, so that they shied away from anything that was going to require more formal schooling. But the issue is that maybe our schooling system is basically conditioning our young people to think they can't be successful. That is part of the conclusions of Professor Carol Dweck from Stanford, who's the founder of the growth mindset idea, and she debunked the whole concept of IQ, and showing IQ is more a question of privilege than it is of any kind of a fact. So at any rate, we need to do something about that. But the now this rapidly changing need, the shortening of the shelf life of knowledge, is resulting here on people having to be continually learning and continually upgrading their learning. In the center part of the United
Big
States,
time question.
yes, Kurt.
You mentioned IQ, and IQ is such an idiotic kind of an expression. And let me point out this simple thing that they did studies where if they allowed children to learn naturally, they had high IQs. They tested them from an early age, their IQ, like high IQs, geniuses, most of them. When they started getting into education, into regular American education, their IQ kept on going down every year.
Yeah.
What is it that we do? We are not educating, we're indoctrinating. We need to be able to expand people's minds to, like I mentioned about, having them outside of the box. Well, why even be in a box? Why have boxes? But we put people in boxes. You're so tall, you're this, you have this ability and not that. We all have gifts that we get to be able to use. And this is the biggest key to what nature proves for us.
What Carol Dweck discovered here with regards to IQ, the young people who believe IQ, they believe their ability to learn is fixed. So as a result, if they get low grades, they think, oh, that's all I'm capable of. So they don't try harder. And if they believe they have a low IQ, they just assume that, well, the low grades that they're getting, their low learning success is to be expected because they just don't have whatever the natural capabilities are. But when she taught them here to be strivers, then we saw that these children who supposedly did not have the IQ were able to outperform the students who thought they had a high IQ because they
I have an average IQ. And that's what I was told. I have an average IQ. Yet I've keynoted the World Congress. I've talked at the United Nations. I mean, what stops people? It's their own little glass ceiling.
Well, yeah, if you
It's the
think you
one
have
that
a
may
fixed,
have also been imposed on them.
yeah.
The key is our education system imposes glass ceilings on everybody.
Well, I think the thing about it is it's a lot of combination things, and I want to switch over to that in a second. But the idea of Carol Dweck is, the growth mindset is if you have a fixed mindset, a fixed thought of what you're capable of, you don't strive to go beyond that. You just accept the results. That's, I guess, where I'm at. But if you have the mindset that you can do whatever you apply yourself to, then you will strive to get better and better. And so this is what she proved. She took a fourth grade in New York City that was one of the worst in New York State. And in 1 year, she helped that go from one of the worst classes in the state of New York to being one of the top classes in the state of New York in just 1 year. And it was really by getting the kids to realize that they control their ability to succeed. And it's not a question of what you're born with, but it's a question of what you strive to do. Okay. So, but the bottom line here is when we talk about that need to become a continual learner, to learn for the rest of your life, that a lot of people in the United States, especially people who did not do well when they were in school, and especially males, working males in the center part of the United States where industry shifted. They've had a huge problem adjusting. And so we get this thing called deaths of despair. And in many cases, this is working class males who skill that they had has gone away, is no longer in demand, and they don't feel capable of learning new skills to be able to continue, and they give up. They say, I can't provide for my family anymore. I'm useless. Let me just end it. So it's really important here, and it's been recognized at the United Nations Summit for Education Transformation 2 years ago. They brought this home that the ultimate goal of education and now has to be to prepare everybody to be a successful lifelong learner. So, and that means you have to be a successful independent learner. You can't be a successful lifelong learner if you're not an effective independent learner. Because when you're 35 years old, there's no teacher looking over your shoulder saying, now do this and then do that and then do that. So this takes us into the area that we see the opportunity that we can make a huge difference in a very short time, is that K through 12 area there of education, that we can close the education gap there. Now, I've said in the past that you can do a mind game. Imagine that we go in a successful school district and we ask seventh grade math teachers, will you pledge to get 100% of your students to be at 100% grade level by the end of the year? The odds are those teachers are going to say, sure, that's what I do now. No problem. But if you go here to one of those failing school districts and ask the same question, the teacher's likely to say, are you crazy? Yeah, that teacher in that successful school district can say that because 90% of their students start the school year grade level ready. But 90% of my students start the school year 2, 3, 4 more years behind grade level with all kinds of problems to be able to apply themselves to learning. It's unfair that you even ask me to achieve the same result, given the difference in the students that we have to work with. And this really hits home is because the conventional wisdom is the difference between successful schools and not successful schools is funding, or it's the quality of the teachers. Well, if we think it's the quality of the teachers, which is what many politicians think, politicians say, look, we have bad score results. It must be the teachers who to blame. But let's take the example and say, well, if that's the case, we're going to take the teachers from the most successful, let's say a primary school, most successful primary school, and we're going to send them and replace the teachers in the least successful primary school with those successful teachers. So if it's all up to the teachers, we should expect a massive improvement in the education results at the end of the year. But we have to remember, we're taking teachers who only have experience with teaching well-prepared and motivated students, and we're putting them in a school where perhaps the absenteeism is 3 times higher, where the ability of students to concentrate because maybe they haven't had anything to eat, or they've got an abusive home situation, or many other problems that are filling up their minds, so they're not able to necessarily concentrate. And they started the school learning off several years behind. Now, the studies from Bloomberg said up to 2 years behind. I believe it's up to 4 years behind, because if we take a community like where I live, a large share, maybe a majority of the students entering the school system have spent years in preschools that have taught them to be multilingual, usually English and Chinese or Korean or whatever, have already taught them to read, have already taught them numeracy before they ever start school. So I see the gap of the most successful schools and the least successful schools could be up to 4 years. And now we have, because, hey, we have to be equal. We have to give equal opportunity. So guess what? That school that's got kids 4 years behind, and the school that's or 2 years behind, and the school that's got kids 2 years ahead, you all have to do the same curriculum all at the same time. And then we come and we see that the teacher in the low achieving school is not teaching, not instructing the same way as that teacher in the most successful school. Well, back to our little example experiment, and we took those teachers from that most successful school, put them into that least successful school, and in any given day, a large percentage of the kids never got the prerequisite prior lesson. They didn't get that. They don't have the prerequisite knowledge to be able to understand what that teacher was planning to deliver in that lesson of that day. So we see many evaluators from the outside. They just come in and they see, well, this teacher in this low achieving school is not instructing the same way the teacher is in the most successful school. And they say, oh, it's the quality of the teachers. So I've spent 3 years at one point traveling around the United States, visiting schools and talking to the better part of 1,000 teachers. And I found here that the dedication and the quality of education and the drive to improve the situation for their students, no significant difference between the best achieving and the least achieving schools. Maybe there's a higher turnover, there's more burnout because there's more stress. I also, the other question is, oh, it's the funding. In the United States, every local community has to pay for their own schools. Well, if you're in a poor community, you don't have as much financial resources. But most states have the means that they provide, they subsidize some of their the poorest schools. So we found here, when we were looking at the study, some of the lowest achieving schools actually spend up to 40% more money per student than the top achieving schools. Well, on the one hand, that's because those least performing schools need it, because the children come to school with more psychological problems, maybe nutritional problems, and a lot more difficult situations. So at any rate, that was were some of the problems. So the question is, okay, so another thing that I saw is I saw a big gap between the fourth and fifth grade. Up through fourth grade, most kids still enjoy the praise of the teacher. If the teacher says, oh, Johnny, that's really great. You want to help me clean the blackboards here, whatever. And the students really, the praise of the teacher means something. They go home for summer vacation between the fourth and the fifth grade, and they come back for the most part just wanting to prove how tough they are, because in their home life, they've now been allowed to go out on the streets, and they're meeting these children who are several years older that have given up on the society's not going to get them to where they want. So they just want to rebel. Their peer status can be more influenced by being the rebel than by being the conformist. So this tells us that if it's going to be much, much more difficult to go and turn things around for students that are fifth grade or beyond than students that are fourth grade or lower. We also, going back to that example of the seventh grade math teacher saying, on the one hand, hey, I get all my students to grade level because they all start grade level ready. And the teacher who says, hey, it's not fair because my students are 2, 3, 4 years behind grade level. If we then ask that teacher who said, I can't do it because my raw materials, my students are not at the same place. If we then say to them, well, what about this? What if I could guarantee you all your students are going to enter your class grade level ready? The odds are that they would turn around and say, well, if that's the case, sure, I'll pledge to get all my students to the next grade by the end of the year. So we don't have to get 12 grades to all be at grade level to make a difference in education. We have to get one. And right now, the assumption that we all make
Bill,
is the students.
real quickly, I'm outside doing some work out here, listening and everything,
Yeah.
and I just want to say something about this idea about this grade level and people don't have the same abilities or whatever that you're mentioning. When people were told that the class that they were going to be getting was the top level class in the whole school, they got to have that because of their work effort or whatever. They were lied to, of course. And because they believed they were getting the top students, guess what happened? Yes, it worked. The biology of belief worked with these teachers. And that's a classic, incredible book by Dr. Bruce Lipton, if you're interested in reading something on the power of belief to affect your genes, the activation or deactivation of gene uh, propensities. So just a little inclusion.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, thank you for that point because it's talking about the power of expectation. If you are taking a job in a school that has continually underperformed, let's say has never even gotten 10% of their students to grade level, that's your expectation of what's possible in that school, and therefore you accept if your class performs at that level, you sort of think, well, that's normal. And so the expectation makes a big difference. Farzana, please.
Yes, Bill, I have many questions, but the first one, as you're discussing about that, the teacher's role is very important. But nowadays, when we have AI and Chat GPT, do you think that need of a teacher is compulsory, and we must be focused on the skill of the teacher, or the all the information students are getting from the AI? They're using Chat GPT and Gemini. Do you think that we should not? Uh, on which level you think that we should switch the students on the AI?
Okay, this gets us into a little bit of a different topic here. I'd like to come back. Hold me to come back to that. But it's AI is going to change things rapidly. Imagine you have sitting on your shoulder here a little companion who sees everything you see, who hears everything you hear, who knows everything about you and everything that you know or don't know, and also knows everything about everything else in the world and knows the pedagogical instinct of the best teachers of the whole world, and is with you 24/7 to explain to you anything that you have the slightest desire to know, or and just in time, just at the moment you need it. That's coming, but it may be a couple of years away. But the question for right now is eh, the proposals that I think I'm looking at don't require AI. And because I don't think that's where the problem is. But you mentioned something that's really important, and you talked about, well, the quality of the teacher and how much does the teacher play. I described here that this recognition that the education, the most important thing about education is preparing people to become successful lifelong learners. I'm not saying a successful lifelong student, or because you can't depend that you're always going to have a teacher. So the number one goal has to be to teach our young people to become independent learners, successful and effective independent learners. Now, if there's somebody there that's constantly telling you, this is what you need to know, remember this, remember that, do this way, do that way, how much thinking do you have to do? You don't have to do a lot of thinking. You just need to obey. And so that's really not helping somebody become an effective independent learner. The way you become an effective independent learner is by learning. So this is what I mentioned in Finland, where they set the goals, even for very young children, set the goals. Now tell me, how would you go about doing that? And then, in other words, helping people learn how to figure out how to pursue goals. So we need to get our young people out of the idea I'm a recipient of knowledge to becoming I'm a pursuer of knowledge. That is probably the number one thing I think will make the difference and is needed in our education system. So we could go as far as to say, whenever a teacher is telling you how something works, they are limiting or hindering your ability to learn how that thing works, to figure out how that thing works. They're limiting your ability to learn how to learn because they're taking that opportunity away from you by telling you this is what you need to know. So getting back to the pilot, because time is going by, and we talk about saying, okay, our goal here is that we want to demonstrate that we can close the education gap in K through 12. And because of what I experienced in traveling around and visiting schools, I believe the chances of success are far less at a much higher cost from fifth grade onwards. In other words, we need to get everybody equal prior to going into fifth. In fact, I have a website, I don't even know if it still works out there, called Ready for Fifth. And the whole goal is to get everybody so that when you're going into fifth grade, you're all on an equal footing. Because, as I said, that seventh grade teacher that says it's unfair for you to compare me to teachers in successful schools because the successful teacher has students starting off motivated and with the prior knowledge, and I don't have that. I don't have motivated students with the prior knowledge. But if you give me students with the prior knowledge and the motivation, hey, I'll make sure they get to that next level. So the thought here is for the pilot is to focus on fourth grade. And the reason why not the earlier grades is because if part of our mentality or part of our thought process here is to prepare these students to become independent learners, fourth grade is a level where we can teach children how to pursue goals, how to set goals, define goals, and pursue goals, and be creative in learning how to pursue these goals in the most effective manner. The other thing here is to focus on a subject. We could focus on everything, but that makes it very complicated to come up with a pilot where we can measure, are we being successful or not? And in discussions with a lot of teachers, we came to the conclusion that math is the best subject to demonstrate we can close the education gap with. And the reason for that is multifold. One is because students generally think math is the most difficult subject, especially at the fourth grade level. So if they see math is the most difficult subject, and now they're becoming successful, oh, wow, I'm tops. I must be smart because look at me. I'm there. I'm at 98% in math. There are studies that show if a student becomes particularly successful in a subject, that rubs off on the other subjects because their mindset is that, hey, I'm smart. I can do all this. This gets a little into what Kurt was referring to here, the expectations upon yourself at that stage. Some of the other reasons are math has very little ambiguity. If we were to go and say we're going to take language skills, well, there's 10 ways to say the same kinds of things in language, and some of them are nuanced better or nuanced less better. But math it's either right or it's wrong, especially at what you learn in K through 4 in math. Another reason is because we know these children come with different levels of language skills when they're in the 4th grade, especially if we're talking about children in schools that have been a history of being less successful. And math has a finite vocabulary. It's not like I have to learn, tens of thousands of words. Here, there's a very small number of words in the vocabulary to be able to understand what's going on in math, especially math up through 4th grade. So the thing that we're looking at here in the goal, the project, the pilot, is can we demonstrate that we can take schools, primary schools, that have never managed to get even 10% of their students to be at an internationally recognized grade level by the end of 4th grade, and in 1 year take those schools to where they have got 70% or more of students at grade level by the end of that school year. Now, in New Jersey, or you could take any state in the United States for that matter, the average number of 4th graders who are at grade level in math is less than 50%. So if we're able to take a school with a history of failure and get 70% of the students in that school to be at grade level, we're changing the whole idea of what can be expected. And this gets back also to what Kurt was talking about is the key to being successful is believing in yourself or believing that it's possible. So if we can set the stage to say there is no excuse anymore to think it's not possible, then that can have a huge ripple effect. Every other school district is going to start saying, hey, we can't, there's no reason we can't succeed in the future. If we're not doing this and we're failing, maybe it's time we swap out some of our decision makers, some of our leaders in our education here. So anyway, let me, Ian, sorry, your hand up there. It's because of the light background. I didn't see it. So I'm sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. No, I'm just saying one thing I've noticed here in the US with math is there's a lot of extra terms that I didn't see when I was learning math back in Ireland. So I think that is a huge impediment to the learning of math here, that you'll get a question and you see a term and you're like, what does that term mean? Whereas if it was asked in a mathematical way, to say, here's the formula, what's the answer to this, then that would help people enormously because they wouldn't need language to solve it.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that one thing that could dramatically improve math at the 4th grade level is just having every child understand the vocabulary of math. We don't isolate that. We talk about terms in the process of whatever the kind of problem is that we have right now, but we don't really go and reinforce, do you know all the vocabulary of
yeah, I know, but the thing about it is, for being good at math, do you need that vocabulary? It's like, I think a lot of it, I've seen far more vocabulary on math in the American system than in any math I've seen anywhere else.
But the thing about it is if the chance is that some people are going to ask you math related things using those terms, it's important that you know them. And there's still not that many. Even if there's double or triple as many terms in math here in certain parts of the world than elsewhere in other places, it's still a tiny amount of vocabulary compared to other subjects.
Yeah, I suppose if you just confined it to the math terms, as they stand, rather than having, an English essay describing how this thing was done, and try and stay as far away from that idea as you possibly can, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. I think you're right. I think the question is in math, but it gets into sort of your degree here, or where are you at? It's like if we look at Time Magazine and Newsweek magazine, uh, in the past when they were widely read in paper format, there was a thing called the fog index, and the fog index said at what reading level are you writing? The writers that wanted to publish articles were told uh, use the fog index, and the fog index said that if you want to be widely read, stay at an eighth grade level or below for the reading level. And so the same thing applies to math. The more terms you know, the more different ways that you know to express certain aspects, the better off you're at. And when we get into the word problems, they can get messy because the people that are describing the word problem to you may or may not be very clear communicators. So, but
Yeah.
the bottom line here, though, I think, is just to be able to say, in the U.S., we now try to base our education on Common Core. Common Core, with regards to math, I believe, was very heavily influenced by Singapore. By the way,
Right.
math is taught in Singapore. So, but it's one of the things here where we got messed up in Common Core is people started to say, how do you teach it more than what it is?
Yeah.
So instead of saying that's the goalposts, hey, go out and figure out how you're going to get to the goalposts, we started telling people, no, you got to get to the goalpost this way. You got to run to the left, then you got to run to the right, and you got to do it this way and that way. I think we lost a lot of sight on being able to convey to people, hey, it's about where we're trying to get to. Now, I understand a reason for part of that is because if you learn certain approaches to doing something, then we can sort of abstract and generalize that approach for something that's a little bit higher order or more difficult on that. Yes, Paula, please. You're muted still, Paula. You're muted.
Okay, what I want to add about that you just said, the Common Core math in the US is based on Singapore. I use both. I use Common Core from the US and I use Singapore. But the problem with the Singapore is the students learn to be just methodically do one thing after the other, but they cannot correlate that to the real world. And that's why I think the project-based learning approach brings them into context, especially for the students they have a hard time understanding any concept. Because sometimes math, there are two types of students in math. The ones that get everything, very abstract, and they get it right away, and the ones that have a hard time even adding beyond, the 25 or something like that. And so the project-based learning, what it does is brings them into the context, and they are money, time, fractions, and a little bit of something. And so they learn to relate, oh, I have a pizza. Pizza could be a fraction. I eat 2/8 of a pizza. And so the Singapore is too methodical. I see it because I teach or used to teach the scientific method, which is when you have labs, you have to have something that involves science, math, physics, everything at the same time. And when the students get at the higher level, like eighth grade, ninth grade, sometimes they forget the basic thing about math. And I said, my elementary school students, because I've been teaching them for longer years, they have a better understanding this than secondary level students because they learn to dissociate with the real application of math. So that's one of the biggest thing about math. That's why people are so confused because the way it's being taught is what it makes it even worse. And that's why students don't perform well.
Yeah, and this is why it's important to not just have the graphic math problem in front of you, but also to be able to take the word problems and being able to understand how I'm trying to go from a situation, take the situation and get it converted to the math, and then be able to solve the math. So I agree with that. Okay, but now we want to talk a little bit. We sort of said, okay, we're going to focus on fourth grade math, and we're going to try to find schools that are among the worst performing schools, but not where it's due to lack of access to schools. There's got to be a school there, and be able to demonstrate that we can take these students and get them to be top achievers, if you would, the equivalent of the best performing schools, and do it in a very short time. And the key to this is to recognize, well, why do we have this big difference? Now, we talked about many of the aspects. We talked about the problem that children from that it's a poverty is the number one reason. And I want to see here. Can I? This is not the right one here. Okay. Let me. Okay. Here, can you? Let me try to. Okay. Whoops. Okay, I've got to reshare. Okay, can you see my screen? Can you see this this X here on my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so what this is really talking about here is if we take a look at the cross the what it's showing is academic achievement is directly inversely correlated to poverty. The one line shows what percentage of students qualify for a free or subsidized lunch. That's the best way to indicate poverty here in the U.S. And so this is based on the average number of children in a school that qualify for a free or subsidized lunch versus their test results. So the highest test results come in schools where the least number of students qualify for a free or subsidized lunch. And as the percentage of students that qualify for a free or subsidized lunch goes up, the test scores go down dramatically. And we can see here that in the United States, the schools that have less than 10%, this actually was done at the high school level. This was a study done by the National Association of Secondary School Principals. They found schools with less than 10% of students qualifying for a free or subsidized lunch. If we only counted those on the PISA assessments, for example, the United States tied the best country in the world for being tops in education. But if we were to concentrate only on schools that have more than 50% of students qualifying for a free or subsidized lunch. Whoops, where's my cursor here? That hump to the left, those schools are at the level of developing countries. In fact, there was a joke going around 25, 30 years ago that we knew how we could improve education results in the United States overnight. Keep in mind, the United States scores around 35th place or so in math in the world. And the answer was, let's smuggle some more students across the border to Mexico, because the feeling was the average achievement in Mexico at the time was higher than the schools with more than 50% of kids at a free or subsidized lunch level in the United States. Now, what makes this particularly bad in the United States is in 2001, there were 4 states in the United States that had more than 50% of public school children qualifying for a free or subsidized lunch. 50%, 4 states. By 2011, that number had quadrupled. We had 17 states in the United States that had more than 50% of their students qualifying for a free or subsidized lunch. And by 2014, that number had increased to 22 states. That's the furthest I did. I didn't continue that study after that, but that shows that it's a very bad situation. And if you notice from this graph on my screen that we have schools that have less than 10% of students, poor students, and we have schools with more than 50% of poor students, and we have almost nothing in between. That means here that because our neighborhood schools, our primary schools are by neighborhoods, and we segregate our population by socioeconomic backgrounds for the most part. You either have schools full of poor people or schools that don't have any poor people. So we get this dramatic change. Now, when this study from the National Association of Secondary School Principals came out, one of the reactions was prior to that, the politicians were, oh, this is terrible, terrible. National emergency. The United States can't be 35th in math. We've got to be one of the tops. And as soon as they heard, oh, well, if we only count the wealthy people and the upper middle class people, we are the best. Oh, therefore we don't have to care anymore, because who the heck cares about the poor people? And so let's stop the effort. So today you can go and try to find a program. Try to find a program somewhere that says we have a plan to raise the achievement level of the lowest 10, 20% of our schools. We can't find a plan. We can't find anybody that's working to make a plan. And if you don't have a plan, how can you expect to achieve it? So this is what we're looking at. We want to go and make it so that people are starting to ask, hey, you're the head of that school, or you're the head of that school district, and your schools are failing. What's your plan? So we can measure next year, the year after, are you making progress? And if you're not making progress, maybe you're not the right person for the job. I'll be that blunt here in terms of educators, because when I was traveling around the country talking to all those educators, I don't think I ever met one single teacher who didn't care. Every single teacher I met wants the best for their students. And so if we can come up with a plan of how they can achieve that, we can turn those teachers into heroes. We can give those teachers a satisfaction, not so that they get the burnout and the frustration that everybody's looking and saying, oh, our school systems are terrible. It must be your fault. And that sort of takes us to another graph I've got here, which is looking at a workshop we were doing here in 22, where basically, I don't know if you can read those, so I'll just read it for you. The top left-hand thing here. Oh, poor education is the main cause of poverty and dysfunctional families. That's the politician speaking. It's all the educators are to blame. And over here's the educator saying poverty and dysfunctional families are the main cause of poor education. So we got everybody's pointing a finger at somebody else. And then the politicians are saying, well, we can't fix the problems of poverty and the family until you fix the education. And the educators are saying, we can't fix the education until you fix the problems of poverty in the family. So we have to get out of that mode of just looking for somebody else to blame and say, let's just get there and do it. So what does it take to do it? We have to look at the direct causes. What are the direct causes of the text here is, I'm sure, is too small. Whoops. Okay.
Will be able to get this presentation?
Yes, I will do that. Unfortunately, we had a presentation where I showed the 400 and something learning units in Khan Academy here that I lost that presentation, but I intend to recreate it and send that. But this one I've got. So the things that we that we see when we start looking at the direct causes. We already know poverty and dysfunctional families is
Yes.
the underlying cause. But the direct cause can be things like, well, the students don't come to school on a regular basis. We know that the attendance, the absentee rate is much, much higher in schools with a high percentage of lower socioeconomic class children. The other thing is, we've already talked about the Bloomberg study showing that, hey, the students come and start school two years behind, but we don't go and say, okay, let's close that 2-year gap and then continue on. We just toss them right into the water and say, you have to swim at the level of the students that are more better prepared. And of course, we just set them up for failure. So we have those problems. Then we have the problems that many of these children in the underperforming schools live in households that are not conducive to doing homework or studying or even valuing education that much.
Student tardiness is one of the major cause.
What's that?
Tardiness can be one of the major cause and is one of the major cause.
Oh yeah, tardiness, and another one is transiency. We know that there's a lot more movement of poor families moving around. New York City, 10%, more than 10%, more than 10% of all public school students in New York City are homeless. Over 100,000. Over 100,000 students in New York City are homeless. And then now a lot of them are homeless. They're living with friends, but maybe they can stay for a while with one set of friends, and then they got to go and live with some other people for another time, and that may cause them to have to switch schools. Or if they're in the shelter system only allows people to stay a certain amount of time, and then they have to go and find another shelter. And then what this results is many of these students are changing schools 2 or 3 times a year. Now, not only does that make it very difficult for the student if every one of the schools is teaching differently, but it makes it almost impossible for the teacher who's sitting there looking at a percentage of his class who has no idea what they're talking about because they weren't here for the prerequisite.
Yes.
So the bottom line is, whether it's because of absenteeism, tardiness, which is another form of absenteeism.
Yes, delay, not punctual.
Yes. Or whether it's just the inability to concentrate because they're tired, they're hungry, they've got traumatic situations going on in their home life, they're being bullied. There can be many, many reasons here why students are not able to follow the lesson of a day.
Parents also have a great role in all these things. If they are not punctual, if they are not sleeping on time, that's why they cannot concentrate in the class.
Well, that's why I mentioned here that we're looking at primarily at primary school students, because it's the primary school students who are very often dependent on their parents to get them to school. And if the parent is having lots of problems themselves, or because of their job situation or whatever, they're not able to get the children to school on a regular basis.
And with the passage of time, what we have seen, that parents are not mature enough to act like a parent. That is the major problem these days.
Right. But the thing about it is well, we're going to come to this in a moment, and then it goes all the way down to negative peer pressure and so forth. These are more the direct causes, okay? Because to just say, well, one of the things is there's been some very significant efforts that have been made in different cities in the United States to say, well, we have to take a holistic approach. We have to help the family at the same time we're trying to help the children. These approaches have not led to any significant success. There's many reasons why not, but the bottom line is we don't care why they haven't succeeded. The bottom line is they have not succeeded. And
That is sad, because I have heard that from the state schools, teachers are going to the family, they are going to their homes and they are meeting the parents personally.
yes,
It is a part of the plan of different US states.
It is, but it's interesting. I saw a documentary in Germany talking about the inequality gap on families and so forth. And they were describing how teachers were doing that. They were going out to visit the families of their children, of their students. And in many cases, in the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds, they couldn't find the parents. They couldn't find the parents. The parents had gone to another city to work and were leaving the kids with different neighbors. So they would spend some time with one neighbor and some time with another neighbor or another relative. So
that is quite dangerous as well.
Yes, and I recall when I was visiting here, there was in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a city with tremendous poverty, actually. And the school officials were telling me that I think it was 2 out of every 3 high school students had one or both parents were substance abusers. And we're just not capable of really doing an effective job. Let me continue. Michael, you've had your hand up for a while, please.
Thank you very much, Bill. I think after listening to your conversation, I've realized that in this conversation, we here are not like included, but again, these things that you're talking about affect us. So what I wanted to say is, with this trend of the way things are changing, the environment is changing. I think, and me having young boys at home, I think this method of education, the ones that they have been using before, the one I used, is outdated, and we should help whoever is involved to change the mindsets of these teachers so that they can teach what is necessary for now in this day and age. Because now in this day and age, students should be thinking about sustainability, artificial intelligence, that kind of thing. But again, with this new technology trend that is happening in the world, my son, who is about 9 years old, he can use this phone better than me. In fact, when I'm lost somewhere, he gets it from here, and quickly he finds what I'm looking for. So this one shows that, and this is not taught in school. This is taught he gets to use the phone at home, and with that mentality they have right now, the children of these days, is surprising, and with that old method of education, I think they are leading them astray. So we should come in handy and see how we can help in that area of education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, because you brought up a very, very important thing. And that is, and we look right now in the United States, there's a big movement to try to take devices away from children. In fact, there's a movement called something, what is it? Wait until 8. So until 8th grade, until age 14, that children should not be allowed to have phones or devices. Then you've got all the way up through high school, which is 17 or 18 years old. There are schools that force the children to take they have to lock up their phones. They're not allowed to have the phones with them during the day. And then the teacher's saying, oh, you can't use artificial intelligence and you can't use this because the teachers are saying, no, the number one most important thing about school is to learn to do what I tell you. And so we're teaching children to obey to more than we are teaching them to be creative problem solvers. So this is a big part of the problem. But let's go back here. This slide, I think, is really an important one here. We've talked about the deficiencies on preparation, the inequalities of preparation before students ever get to school, which is oftentimes never overcome. They start off 2 years behind, and they're never able to really catch up. There's always 10% that'll succeed anywhere, but a lot cannot. Then we have the students that are in a class with really varying prior knowledge and different abilities to concentrate. So what's a teacher supposed to do if they're looking out at a class and maybe only 30% of that class has any ability to understand what that teacher is about to say? What are they supposed to do? Do they dumb down what they're teaching to where the majority of the students are going to be able to follow? Do they go and repeat the lessons from before? What do they do with the student who is several years behind in their learning? Or
अंदर से एयरपोर्ट ला रही है डिजास्टर है बाइक को दे दो बाइक को दे यार जा किधर है रली अंदर से मुझे एयरपोर्ट ला दो प्लीज
Okay, so sorry about that. Where does it aim? How did they be successful? So the conclusion really is what we need is we need an education program that is going to be successful even with students that have widely varying prior knowledge. It has to be successful with students who only sporadically come to school. It has to be successful with students, and even students who come to school who are not able to concentrate on a given day. It has to be successful there. That we need a system that's going to do that because we don't have it in our control. The education community does not have the ability to say, I'm going to make sure all my students are equal when they come to school. I'm going to make sure all my students have equal opportunity to have a conducive home life to learn. I'm going to make sure that my students have the same level of concentration and the same level to understand and absorb knowledge at the same pace. We don't have that ability. So the very model of having a megaphone to broadcast knowledge for people to absorb is a fallacy. It's a method that would only work if your level of knowledge and abilities is very low. Like we had a couple of 100 years ago when people had simple factory jobs and simple things, they didn't need to know a lot. But if you need to know more, you have to have the ability to deal with all the varying situations of different students. And the variety of problems and situations in lower socioeconomic backgrounds is much greater than in an upper middle class community where people are more or less, they're living comfortable, they're more or less educated themselves, so they're able to get those additional words and vocabulary over to their children, and they can pass the motivation on to learn to their children, those teachers in those schools are much more successful because the students coming into their school are much more homogeneous in terms of their learning and desire and so forth. So we really need this capability to deal with all these students with different needs and different abilities more in the lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's not going to work if the teacher is the driving force, because that's one to many. We got many students in the class, and the lower the socioeconomic background, the larger the class size, which even makes it worse. So we've got a whole bunch of people out here with all different needs, and we got one person here trying to satisfy all those needs. That's not a model that makes sense to be successful. So we really need to go and say, either we're going to have to find a device or an assistant teacher or a teacher, so we can have almost, if need be, one-to-one, one-on-one. Not really practical. But now we've got that other thing saying, hey, wait a minute. The number one goal of our education system is to teach people how to learn, to leave them confident in their ability to learn anything they need to know at any time. So that's we're not going to get there by somebody saying, okay, now go and take this column and add those columns and write the number here, and now go and go to the next column and add those and write that number there, plus see if the number from the previous one had anything to carry and add it on. We are not teaching people how to learn when we do that. We're teaching them to do what they're told. So we're teaching them maybe how to do multi-column math, but we're not teaching them how to learn. So the thing we've got to do is, if we can teach them how to learn, and there's 30 kids in a class, we've got 30 people each learning to work at their pace and learning to progress. So if we have a mastery-based system where the system is, hey, once you've mastered this piece, you can go on to the next piece. Right now, in our education system, we are time or age-based. So we say, okay, you're going to spend a day learning this, and then we're going to spend a day learning something else. Now, that doesn't say anything about whether you've mastered whatever you were supposed to learn the first day well enough to be able to learn what you're supposed to learn in the second day. So the bottom line is on this is we're concluding we need to have mastery-based education where the student is allowed to master an item before it moves on to anything that's dependent on their having mastered that. So does that make sense? By the way, the teachers' colleges have been teaching this to new teachers here, at least here in the United States, but I think really pretty much around the world, at least in the developed countries, the idea of learner-centric education has been the norm. That whole saying, don't be the sage on the stage, but be the guide at the side. So it's all about helping people learn how to learn more than it is about helping them learn math or physics or biology or history. So I'm seeing, I don't know whose hands are up. So I'm just going to start at the top of the list. And if you're not waiting to talk, but Paula, do you want to add something?
Yeah, for a while. First of all, I want to ask you, somebody already asked the question. Are you going to send us this workshop? Because
Yes.
I would like to read that.
Yes.
That was my first thing.
No.
Second is, you mentioned that, okay, I think the previous person, the one that has a child that is 8 years old or something like that, he mentioned that education, he's been teaching wrong. No, I don't think so. I don't think teachers in the past have been teaching this wrong. It's because it was what it needed at the time. Now we are in the 21st century and we need to prepare the students for the things that are coming along for the 21st century. That's why we are using artificial intelligence. We have to use artificial intelligence. We need to teach them how to be strategic thinking, collaborative thinking, critical thinking, the humanistic approach, manufacturing, because in the past it was the education system, there were two types on it. The rich, which always knew that they were being prepared to be in charge of their business, whatever this was, and the poor, which were being, they needed to know how to do basic math and reading to be a factory worker. But this is no longer the case, because one of the things that happened from 1950 all the way to the year 2000 is there was a big revolution in the educational system, and the educational became very fundamental to become the equalizer in the world. From there is where we get the new people, the new reachers, the new, the Facebook guys, the Amazon, the Google guys. Those are average guys that use their knowledge to become very successful and created a companies. This is not the Rockefellers. This is not the JP Morgan Chase. This is not the Vanderbilts or anything like that. This is not an acquired generational fortunes that were happening. It was people using their knowledge, using their education. It has been demonstrated that it works. So that's why now the educational system has been changing, and we have to, I mean, at least I want to do my part in bringing this knowledge to the people that don't have access to. How? Making everything that has become available to the people that know the inside, and bring it to the lower level and say, okay, you also can be part of this. Use it for be a continuous learner, because that's the only way you're going to evolve. If you get static, the moment you get stagnant, you're dead. Mm-hmm. Because everything is evolving and you need to acquire. And you always have to be reading something to be, just stop the multiple chat groups that give you anything, and just get rid of all that and just keep on the few things that it get you some place. And so that's what I think. Okay. And it's possible. Okay. Even in the teachers, some of the teachers, yeah, I mean you defend the teachers also, but I have been a teacher in the past, and I can tell you many are lazy and they don't want to do as much to bring up level those students. So you can actually make subgroups within the class. You have the ones that learn fast, the ones that are very slow, the ones that are average. And you can always bring little by little, using the techniques that work. Some of the techniques don't work. Memorization doesn't work. But still many teachers use that. The way assessments are being made. Now there are so many strategies for teaching, but it takes time, even for the teacher, to learn how to implement that in the classroom. So that's
Paula,
what I wanted.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Thank you. Ian, did you want to add something?
Okay, three things. Looking at food, obedience, and being the guide at the side. So on the food thing, I remember my daughter telling me that while they were getting free food, this was, after the COVID or something like that, they kept free food for a while. She said the food was better. So not only does, universal food system improve things for the people who can't afford it, it improves it for everybody. Because the food is healthier. The people who provide it, the caterers, are able to say, okay, this is exactly how much food we need, and we can maintain it at a particular quality.
Yeah, very interesting here. There's in Africa, there's an organization called Mary's Meals. They're headquartered in Scotland, and they primarily look to promote education by taking street children who are not going to school at all because they're spending their day foraging and begging for food just to survive for another day. And by making food available in schools, they're able to help those children get an education. On board. And they currently feed about 2.5 million children every single school day. Amazing story. And they do it for very little, about less than $25 a year, I think, per student. Okay. But anyway, let me go to Adwa, and then I want to.
No, hang on. The two more points.
Oh, okay.
Okay, on the whole obedience thing, obviously not a good idea, and it's not something that builds character, because if you're looking for somebody to tell you what to do all the time, that's not going there. I remember, I don't know, I was talking in a study hall or something, and a nun said, "Oh, the thing on obedience," and I kind of thought, "Okay, I'll give you an essay on obedience," and I wrote the whole thing on character and all the rest of it, and she's about to leave, and I said, "Your essay, read it." Anyway, the other thing is the guide by the side. Yeah, this is a standard thing in education, teaching that everybody has their own reading styles and learning styles and whatever. And I did a year of teacher training, but what you find the attitude of the teachers that were doing this with me is that, okay, we're going to go into school and we're going to have 20 to 30 people in the class. How do we even map their learning styles, let alone adapt to them,
Yes, no, and I'm going to touch on that point, because that's really key to why we have so much difficulty getting out of the status quo. Adwa, please. Adwa, do you want to make a comment? Your hand is up. You have to unmute yourself. Okay. Don't know. He might be having connection problems. Okay, so we described the situation here, but what we see that in the education system today, is teacher driven and it's schedule driven. So it is not focused on learner, it's focused on teacher. It's not focused on mastery, it's focused on schedules. And so when we look here and say, how can we really make a difference from the perspective of our people learning what they need to learn? The only way you can really accomplish that is mastery based. And there's a tremendous video out there from Sal Khan from Khan Academy called Teaching for Mastery or something like that. And which he describes, for example, the situation if you were building a house. And right now we sort of say, oh, 70%, that's a good enough to be able to go on to the next next item. And say, imagine you poured a foundation and the inspector comes and he looks at it and he says, yeah, well, there's a flaw here and there's a flaw there, but hey, 70%, go ahead and start the first floor. And so you build the first floor and he comes and looks and says, yeah, that's a problem, but it's good enough, 70%, go build the next floor. We know it's only a matter of time until that house falls in, because we've just got accumulation of flaws along the way. So the first goal here is to say, if we want to have a successful education system, we have to make it mastery based, because mastery is what it's about at the end of the day. When the end of the day, you go to take the final exam, if you mastered the knowledge or not. Now, we have a lot of places that say, let's stop testing because we don't like the test results. So, instead of going and fixing the problem, let's stop testing it. and I've actually.
Hello, Mr. Bill.
Oh, yes, Adwai. Yes, you're here.
I'm so sorry. My network just went off.
Okay.
Okay, so with regards to I remember you said something about recreating a master program, which is quite universal and is in line with the new AI development. So in my country, I'm in Ghana, that's in Africa. A majority of the stakeholders in education are government officials. So it's like mostly the government comes up with the educational curriculum. And I'm just wondering, if we are to implement something like this in Africa or Ghana specifically, is it going to be is it something we'll have to do going through the government, or we'll just have to start with a bit of private school, see how it works, then we make the proposal to government, or we'll just start straight up from government? Like, how are we going to implement that?
I think particularly the case of Ghana, I happen to know your Minister of Education. So and he he used to run a charter school network in Los Angeles in the United States here. I have the impression from him he's open to new ideas and he wants to create a success. And your president is in the same category. I don't know when the next election round is because in politics around the world, there's always you can have really a good idea that's good for the people. But if you're from the other party and you're the one suggesting a good idea, then the other party's going to say it's a bad idea.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
and vice versa. And Ghana, I know your last couple of elections were very contentious.
Unless you do like Bernie Sanders and go to the opposite side and get them to suggest it if they're in power,
Right, right. And then Common Core is that's the problem here right now. The Republican states are definitely shooting down Common Core as the worst thing that anybody imagined. But actually, Common Core was the invention of the Republicans Governors Association, led by, I think, Lamar Alexander when he was governor of Kentucky or something, to bring in accountability. And they were everything Common Core, Common Core, Common Core until President Obama said it's a good idea. And then they said, no, it's a terrible idea. So politics can get into the problem. But the idea is to take whatever you've got for leadership and find ways to show them that they can be heroes by doing the right thing.
Okay.
Okay. So the for us for right now, one of the big problems is when it's teacher driven, we have that one-to-many situation, and then that forces them into that thinking of I need a one size fits all because I'm only one person. I can only give one lecture at a time, and even if I break my class into 3 sections, then I can only devote 1/3 of my time to each one of those sections. And the net result is we're not really getting everything done that we need to get done. If I can go and find a way to get every one of my students to be a striver and get every one of my students to be working like crazy to master whatever the materials are that we're supposed to master, then those that are best at learning are going to be very successful on their own. And then I can focus my time on helping those that are less successful learn to become more successful. Not necessarily learn how to do long division, but learn how to find out how to do long division. Because that way they become independent. And if I'm not available right now, they're not sitting there waiting for the teacher to walk around to help them, but they're taking an initiative to figure out how do I move forward to the next step. So what we almost need to have is an apprenticeship program in our school system that elevates learning how to learn to be the number one priority. And if we make mastery based a system where you only proceed to the next item when you've mastered all the prerequisites, there's no value in sending somebody off to learn something that has not mastered the prerequisites to be able to do that. You would be a terrible manager if you tell your workers to go do something they can't do. So that we need a system where we never ask a student to learn something that they do not have the prerequisites to succeed at. And what that means is that we have to recognize that different students learn at different paces. Some students will learn very fast. They're totally motivated, and we have an hour in that class a day, but they go and spend 2 extra hours because they just want to move forward as quickly as possible. And so we don't want to hold them back. We want to let every student move forward at their best pace, and we want to be able to go and have teachers be able to do management by exception, where they're able to identify the students that are not progressing as quickly as they could and figure out how to help them learn how to learn more effectively and how to progress faster. Does that make sense? So this means that the teacher, the idea of the central lecture, it doesn't work. And it's being recognized. We've had this big shift. Is everybody aware of the concept of flipped classroom? Flipped classroom is where teachers said, oh, if I give my lecture, the typical way a couple of decades ago was the teacher gave a lecture, the teacher showed a couple of examples on the blackboard, maybe called a couple of students up, show a couple of examples on the blackboard, and then told everybody, now go home and do these practice exercises as homework to reinforce that you've grasped that item. So the student gets home, and the ones that didn't grasp it are sitting there, and they say, but I don't know how to do this. But there's nobody to ask. They don't know what to do. So they don't do anything. And the next day they come to class, they have not mastered that item, but the class is now moving on to the next item. So the educators came up with the idea of flipped classroom and saying, okay, let me take my lecture. I'm going to record my lecture. And then I'm going to tell all my students, now you watch my lecture at home. Or you read the book, you read the chapter in the book, and you watch my video lesson. And when you come to class, we're going to do the practice exercises in class. Because that way, if you have problems doing the practice exercises, you raise your hand and I can come over and help you. So that greatly increased mastery. And there's many programs through teachers' colleges and things like this now, teaching teachers how to flip their classroom, how to go and make videos and so forth. But what's happened along the way is a lot of teachers realized I'm not the best at giving lectures. And I'm not really that knowledgeable and good at knowing how to record my lecture effectively. Oh, but I found this lecture series out there on YouTube. They're great. So I'll just tell my students, go watch this lecture out here, or go read the chapter in your textbook, and then come to class and we'll do the practice exercises. So that idea of the flipped classroom, does that make sense? To go and say, hey, you do the practice when there's somebody there to help you if you get stuck, but watching a lecture you can do, you don't need that. And by the way, if it's recorded, if you heard me say something and you said, what did he say? What did he say? You can go and replay that part of the video, or you can watch the video twice. Okay, so this has become a standard practice in a lot of schools, and it has shown improvement. So what are your thoughts on that, on flipped classroom?
Yeah, I think that makes sense because you've turned it around. It's like it used to be valuable having somebody there lecture in front of you, because that's the only way you get the information at one time. But obviously, if you can look at it whenever you like, you can slow it down, you can speed it up, you can take it to the speed you like, you can go back. It's like you can ask the question, in a sense, ask the question, what's going on here, without the embarrassment of having to ask the question. You just
right. And now with a relatively simple, the tools are becoming available, that if you're not that good in the language that the teacher recorded it on, you can ask the video to be played in whatever language you're good at. So this is another change that's coming in it. But the idea of the flipped classroom, so we're not dependent on the teacher lecture. The teacher, as I said, is maybe telling the students, watch somebody else's lecture. So we've already moved the teacher out of that one particular role. Now, but that still leaves us.
The buddy system in education works so well that you get people to be able to work as teams, and they collaborate.
Yes, peer teaching.
Yeah, they help refine the
Yeah, okay. I think Kurt's referring to peer teaching. And yes, that has also been demonstrated to be effective. But there's a problem with project-related, project-based learning. And that is, very often, if you observe, if you have teams of 3 or 4, and they're doing a project that's going to be graded and that's going to affect their grade, very often you see the more motivated students pushing the weaker students to the side and say, just stay out of the way. I don't want you interfering with my grade. So at the end of the day, it's not what a group does. Believe it or not, it's not what a group does. It's what you do. You're the one that has to go and take your final exams. you're the one that has to go and apply for the job. So in the end of the day, it's important that each student has fully mastered the material. And this is why the drive now is to have personalized education. Now, personalized education or the very idea of mastery-based education pushes us into the situation that different people learn at different speeds. If we add to this the fact that they started off in different positions, it's going to be very common that we could have students that are years apart in their knowledge in the same class. I have this is a book by Sal Khan of Khan Academy, a famous book of his, the One World Schoolhouse. And it's very interesting on this because he describes how these students would be working at such different places in their learning progress, but they would each learn. And he gets to the point that, well, that solves the problem of absenteeism. A student is absent because they're sick, because their parents couldn't get them to school, whatever, doesn't make any difference. When they come back to school, they pick up where they left off. It's totally immaterial where the rest of their classmates are at. In other words, there is no such thing as a class anymore. There is no such thing as group learning because everybody is doing something else. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have a class, for example, on working well with others, where you bring together temporarily those people who are at that spot where that's their next learning unit, and they collaborate on that one learning unit, and then they continue on their own. But the recognition has to be there. At the end of the day, it's what each individual student has learned to master on their own. That's the crux of the matter. Now, if everybody's learning at their own pace, we have another issue. That means no schedules. So what does that mean to a teacher? I'm a teacher, and I've got this student who's finished the whole year's material in 3 months. And I've got this other student here, he's still 3 years behind. What am I supposed to do? When do we give the exams? When do I give any interim exam? And the idea here is we've got to go and eliminate the idea of schedule or age-based education. If people are learning based on mastery, every individual is working forward and to master, and when they master a point, they can go on to the next point. If others are not that far, that's okay. They'll get there when they get there. But everybody at the level they're at, they have fully mastered what they've learned until this point. I can recall visiting adult literacy programs here in different cities in the United States. And the thing that was so amazing to me was how many of these adults that were in these courses to learn how to read had high school diplomas. Because the school system says you sat through the year, you go on to the next year, and you go on to the next year, whether you've learned the material or not. And so it's interesting, just a couple of years ago, either Mississippi or Alabama, one of those, which was rated worst in the United States of states, they stopped social promotion and they said mastery-based promotion, and with a whole bunch of exceptions, but by and large. And they've jumped up. So there's now 17 states in the United States that are worse than they are. So, but the bottom line is we know it's been proven that mastery-based education will work, but you've got to accept it's no longer schedule-driven. We have Khan Academy, a system out there that's used by, I think the last I heard is like 140 million people use Khan Academy worldwide now to learn. It's in a great many languages, available in a great many languages. And the way it works is they break down whatever subject matter. You can go all the way from pre-kindergarten math all the way up to advanced calculus at a master's degree level. You can take biology all the way up through nursing or pre-med. You can learn anything. 10,000 courses that they have in the meantime. And what they do is they take a subject like math. The math platform is there, and they break it up and say, okay, we've identified about 450. There's 450 learning units between preschool and fourth grade, the end of fourth grade. And the idea here is a learning unit might be something like learn to add single column math, arithmetic, learn to add single columns. So you're not having to deal with carrying numbers. And then another one, if you mastered that, you can move on to maybe learn how to add multi-column arithmetic. And then if you master that, you can go on to multi-column arithmetic with carrying, and then you learn how to carry. Or if it's subtraction, you learn how to subtract numbers where no borrowing is required, and then you learn another learning unit is how to learn with borrowing. So it's step by step by step by step, and you can work your way through these. Now, the question is, well, if somebody has mastered every one of those 449 or 450 learning units, can we assume they have really mastered fourth degree math? Everything, if they mastered every single learning unit from pre-kindergarten all the way through the end of fourth grade, can we say they have 100% mastered math, fourth grade math? That's a question. Please, somebody answer.
Sorry, building what system? The system we have, or the mastery system?
No, this is a mastery-based system from Khan Academy that has divided up the math into 449, I think it is, learning units between pre-kindergarten up to the end of fourth grade. And if the question is whether or not if a student has 100% mastered every single one of those questions or every single one of those learning units, can we assume that they are now have fully mastered fourth grade level?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so if that's the case, then the next question is, looking at our pilot idea, is what are the chances that a student would be able to master all 440 of those learning units in one school year? One school year being about 180 days.
Plenty of time.
Right? Because here's the thing. There's a teacher in California who is a sixth grade math teacher. And what he did is he sends all of his students back to kindergarten. He says, you go back to kindergarten and you start off with the kindergarten exercises and you just prove your mastery all the way up. Every one of his students began his class having failed fifth grade math. He doesn't have any students that pass fifth grade math. And many of his students are only at a second or third grade level in math. So it doesn't make any difference. You go back to kindergarten level and you start working your way through. Now, the odds are, even if you missed certain concepts along the way, some you probably get, especially just from life experience, you will have learned some things. So what he says is you go into a learning unit. The first thing you do is you take the assessment. If you pass the assessment, and the assessment used to be, I think you've tweaked it a little, it used to be you had to get 10 problems of variations on that, whatever that learning unit is. You had to get 10 in a row correct without any mistake. You make a mistake, you got to start all over again. And so the idea is, hey, if you know it, if you have gone up and you're at a second grade level, the question here, can you do single digit addition? No sweat, you're going to knock out those 10 in probably 2, 3, 4 minutes. So even if we assume you need 10 minutes for that, that's 5 an hour you're knocking out on that. So if we assume, hey, you're probably going to be able to take 50% of these items, you're probably going to be able to knock out in an average of 10 minutes. And then you're going to have some that you made mistakes, you made mistakes. Gee, what do I do now? Well, Khan Academy has a thing that whatever problem you're on right now, you can say, give me a hint. Okay, give me a hint. By the way, Khan Academy is free and it runs on anything from a cell phone to any device. And there's even a version of it that will run without internet connectivity. And I can get into that later. So, but the idea here is, okay, I can knock out and do probably 5 an hour, at least 5 an hour here of the ones I already know. And then occasionally I'm going to get stuck and I can ask for a hint. Give me a hint. And it would say, okay, well, here's the first thing you would normally do with that particular problem. It's got a very unique program, and I have a video that explains exactly how it works internally. It's able to generate 1 billion exercises of all different kinds, so that no 2 times of doing an assessment will you ever get the same exercise, the same problems. So it says, here's how you would approach problems of this type, of this pattern. And then you could look and say, oh, okay, well, did that jog my mind enough? Oh, no. Oh, can you give me another hint? And it will give you what the next step would be. And so you can walk through all the steps. If you've tried that with the hints and you still don't feel comfortable that you can answer that kind of problem, then you can go and say, okay, show me a video, show me a tutorial. Or you can just interrupt in the middle and say, these hints aren't helping me, just show me the tutorial. And you can go through the tutorial. And then if that wasn't enough to help you go through, you can always go back and say, let me ask the student next to me. Because in traditional schools, hey, you don't talk, the teacher talks. Here we're saying, hey, no, you take the initiative to find out how to solve your problem. And it will help you with that. So he took this approach. And look at the results here, going from 5th grade to 6th grade, going from where that began, what the school district's averages, the county's averages. The average are all of California. And here is what is passing. And take a look at what happened to his class of failures that went from being here so far below passing and below the California average to being so far above in just 1 year. And we have to realize that even the students that didn't 100% get to having a 100% grade level, they're probably 90% there, but now that 90%, they're rock solid in that 90%. Okay, so this is the basic concept there to being able to learn the math. So if we agree that for 50% you can do maybe 10 an hour on average, and you might have here those where, oh, you asked a hint and, oh yeah, I got it now with the hint. Maybe there's another 30% with a couple of hints you're able to figure out how to do those, because you can get enough hints that it walks you through the entire process of how to solve that problem type. And then on those, maybe there's 20% of the cases where you need a lot more help and you need to devote the whole hour to just that one. But if you add all that together, it adds up to about, I don't know, 120 or 130 hours that you would need to be able to walk your way through from preschool all the way through the end of 4th grade materials. And your level of knowledge should be such then that we could probably set the passing grade, the grade on your final exam, to say, have you mastered 4th grade math to 95%? In other words, require all the students to have at least a 95% at a grade level final exam to consider to be having qualified for that. And the grade levels here would then be more like your different colored belts in karate or judo, that you've achieved a 1st grade belt, you've achieved a 2nd grade belt, a 3rd grade belt, and 4th. And we want them to be at the 4th grade belt so that they would be entering 5th grade 100% grade level ready, which is what we said at the beginning. Now we have teachers that are saying, hey, if my students come into the class grade level ready, I'll get them to the next level. And those students will have learned to drive their own learning. Kurt, please.
That's the beauty of this genius, is that when you tell the entire class, 95% of you have to pass or you all fail, or whatever it might, you can play with. Because when you make it a class project, that makes the smarty pants help the not so smarty pants, the ones that are a little bit slower, and gets the camaraderie happening.
Yes,
Because
team spirit.
yes, and teaming is so powerful.
Yes, actually this is, but the thing is, we're not saying you either get 95% or you fail. What you can say is our goal is to get it 70%. You get it 70%, there's some incentive for the whole class if we can get to that 70% mark. Or you can say, hey, if we can get to 90% of the students to have achieved 95 or better on the final exam, then you qualify, the whole class qualifies for some additional bonus or something like that.
You
But
could make a deal with a company and say, look, if my class does this, will you subsidize them into getting into college or whatever it might be?
no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And this goes through all the grade levels. Right now, we're only talking fourth grade and we're talking math, because if you have gone in a school that has never gotten 10% of their students to be at grade level in the prior 10 years, and all of a sudden you've got them going to 70% of students at grade level in a state where the average is only less than 50%. Now you've gone and raised everybody's expectations as to what the norm should be. Kurt.
And New Jersey will be the example for all the bloody and countries.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is that that I wasn't meaning that everybody would fail or something if you didn't get 95%. But you mentioned also about the idea of different learning styles and so on and so forth. So we use everybody's learning style and approach it in a way that everybody can be able to be balanced.
The key thing on this, though, is we don't have the concept of a class that consists of people who are at the same place in their learning. They might be at the same place age-wise, but they're each learning wherever they're at. There's no sense in playing the game and saying you're at someplace you're not at.
Right. And one of the things about that also is that we've clumped people into the different levels in a grade. Let's say in seventh grade, there's the A level, which is the people who are the smartest and so on and so forth. And when we do that, it belittles the other ones, and it doesn't allow the interchange of the smart with the lesser so-called smart. They're not less smart, they're smart in some areas.
Mm-hmm.
And that can benefit the people who are not smart in those areas, but are smart in the left brain kind of things, and so on.
Yeah. And there's another thing, going back to Carol Dweck and her whole growth mindset. And that is the idea that there is no such thing as failing an exam. The question is, did you pass the final exam on the fourth grade? There's nobody saying no. The only things you can say is yes or not yet, because that brings in another component that we need to add on this education system. And that is the idea that if everybody's learning at a different pace, some people are going to be ready for the final exam after 4 months, and some people are going to need 18 months to where they're ready to take that final exam.
Somebody just graduated from Harvard at 13 years old or something like that?
Well,
I mean, it doesn't matter what age you are.
Yeah.
And what matters is what you do with it.
Well, it also matters the belief here that I am going to master. I'm going to master whatever it is. So that to do that, however, we have to be able to change the way. We have to get rid of high stakes testing. We have to get rid of the test that says, oh, you didn't pass the test, you got to repeat the year. So we say, oh, you didn't pass the test, we'll try again next month. In other words, we need to be the idea that you take exams when you're ready. You take exams.
When you get the results of the exams, you know where your weakness is.
Exactly.
And then you can look at that and approach it.
You fix those up and you move on. So these are some characteristics that we're looking at. And Khan Academy is, as I say, it's free and it's available and we can use it. Now, there's one other thing I didn't mention. Well, what's the teacher doing? The teacher's no longer responsible for instruction. The teacher's no longer responsible for assessment. They're not giving quizzes or tests because it's all built into the system. So what is the teacher doing? Well, the teacher becomes the mentor coach. So think of the coach on a track team. The coach on a track team is not in the race. They're standing on the side and they're advising their athletes on how to succeed. When I was in high school, I did high jump, hurdles, and pole vault, and I had a coach. And I've probably heard this story many times. He was the chemistry teacher in the high school, and he was the most hated teacher because you could be perfect and you couldn't get better than a C in his class. He was constantly, we had the impression, he was constantly trying to catch us in mistakes, get us to make a mistake in that. And he was always criticizing what we were doing. So then we go out here at the end of
I had a
school,
math teacher like that too.
and we're practicing track and field. And what's he doing? He's saying, oh, you need to flip your leg up like this when you're going over the hurdle, or you need to do this when you're. He was the same critical person. And we loved him. Why? Because everything he was doing was to help us win. That's his only purpose that he was there. He was criticizing to help us win. And that little difference in mindset totally changed the way we reacted to what he was doing. So we want to create the opportunity for those teachers to be the coaches of their students, to working to help their students win. So by being able to observe from the side, those students who are already winning, they're doing great on their own, let them run. The students that are having trouble and maybe their technique could be improved, maybe their approach to learning, maybe they could go a little earlier to look at the video, all of those types of things. That's what the teacher can be doing from the side. The teacher as the mentor coach, he's on the same side as the student, looking, how do I improve this student's ability to learn effectively and efficiently?
And Paula's going to tell us some more too. Paula?
Yes, Paula?
Turn your mic on, please.
Oh,
yes.
One just comment in there regarding using personalized learning, which I'm all for. Everybody learning is the objective of what I would actually go for. The thing is timing, because you remember time is money at the same time. If a good student for example, he uses artificial intelligence or uses a system like Khan Academy that has so many subjects, and I did check that after you mentioned it. Yes, all the subjects are there, and that's how I would like. Maybe that's the reason why a lot of people use it. But the thing is, for the students, if some of them, the good ones, learn and they're able to do a course in 4 months, and other ones take 18 months, the slow ones are going to take twice as much. Basically, by the age of 38, 17, they are supposed to finish high school. If they take twice as much to finish that, they're going to be 30 by the time they finish high school. That's kind of like the only issue in there. You got to, I mean, we have to think about how do we solve something like that?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the point. And one of the things Khan Academy does is it monitors the progress of students. So you can see those students that are progressing great on their own. The teacher takes time, spending time interacting with the students that are doing great. That's less time that teacher has available to deal with the students, to help the students that are needing help the most. So what we want to do is be able to create a management by exception so that the teacher can focus their time on where it will have the greatest payback. The other thing here that is more likely to happen is that not that students are not going to complete until they're 30, but you're probably going to have the significant percentage of the class completing high school by the time they're 10 or 12. But the key thing here is that the system notifies the teacher and the student himself or herself when they're not progressing as well as they should be, or if a student gets stuck on a particular learning unit, they've tried everything and they spent 4 times as much as one might expect. They're into multiple hours on this one thing. How do I do long division? I can't get it right. That the teacher will be alerted that the student is having trouble with that learning unit, and the teacher is actually able to play back what the student has done. What was the problems that the student was working on? What did the student do for solutions or intermediate steps along the way? And whether or not that student looked at hints, whether that student watched the video, did they watch the video once or twice? The teacher will be able to see all that and then decide, is this a case where I need to intervene or not? If they have the sense that the student is getting it, they're just needing to maybe watch things twice, but then they're getting it and they're learning how to get themselves unstuck. They were stuck, but they're in the process of learning how to get themselves unstuck. The teacher doesn't need to intervene. Or if the teacher does intervene, what the teacher does not do is help that student know how to do long division. The teacher limits their intervention to helping the student figure out how to get themselves unstuck if they get in a situation like that again. So that by the time a teacher has intervened 3 or 4 times with a student, the odds are that student has now got it and they're progressing just as fast as the original fast progressors, so that the number of students needing help keeps getting smaller and smaller. So the amount of time that the teacher can devote to those students is getting greater and greater. Yes, will some students just take longer? But we have to remember, even the student who takes longer has got a solid foundation in the parts that they've achieved. So if we come out and say that, okay, with this method, if somebody completes all the lessons in a year, they should be able to get 95% or better on the final exam. And we've got some that they didn't. They're still at 60% because they didn't complete all the lessons, or maybe they're at 80%. But like we said, okay, go and continue your process, and then maybe next month or in 2 months, then you're going to try to take the exam again, because you're building on a solid foundation all along the way. Now, there's going to be cases, there's students that have disabilities or learning disabilities that will need special handling, but we're helping each student progress at their personal maximum capability. And again, we have more time to devote to those students who have reasons that it's more difficult. Now, what does this mean? This means if a teacher, in addition to seeing who's progressing and who's stuck academically, we're gonna see, the teacher's gonna see, hey, this student's not putting in the effort. They're not putting in that solid hour a day. They may be sitting at the desk, but they only put in 10 minutes because the system will report how active was that student. And if that's the case, then I've got to start, if I'm the teacher, I've got to start observing why. Or I've got to go talk to that student. Why? What's up? I see you're not putting in that degree of effort. And it could be because the student says I'm being bullied. It could be I have a situation at home that's really bad. We have physical abuse in the family, and this, or my father lost his job, and we don't have enough to eat. And it doesn't make any difference, because that mentor coach says it's my job to figure out how I'm going to help this student cope with or overcome that situation. Whether I'm going to get a social worker involved in this, whether I'm going to say, oh, it's motivation, let me explain to you why, what's the advantage, how this is going to be able to help you later on. It doesn't make any difference, because that mentor's coach job is to help their students be successful. And so, yes, you could have a situation where you've got people, because of a disability, they're never going to learn all the material. They're never going to go beyond a 6th grade education. But the thing is, we have to help each student reach the maximum of what they can do. That's the philosophy. Does that make sense to others of you?
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
there are some other strategies also. The one that you're referring in this moment is the one where a student gets their personalized learning and just there at the desk. But there are strategies to present the class. There are actually, but the teacher has to know how to present the class. There is one that is called the whole class strategy, where the teacher guides the lesson or is kind of like the coach of the lesson, but it's given to the whole class, independent, not in separate groups, but the whole class. And they got using simulation for subject like chemistry, physics, science, biology, the hardcore scientific subject, which usually students have a hard time. Mathematics too. In mathematics, is geometry, algebra, and everything in there. So, and there is another strategy that's called interactive lessons, which basically that is the one that I like the most, because the teacher has to teach the lesson posing a question, but a very clever question. So that doesn't say, tell me what this is. No, it makes and guides the student to think deeper into something like pose the question, allow the students to give based on previous knowledge, of course. I got the students to give an answer or an attempt to give an answer to something. Later, after a certain time, the teacher doesn't interfere in that. Again, goes through the simulation and expose and presenting, guides the question step by step that once, because there are specific learning goals that has to be covered in that lesson. The lesson has to be about learning goals. It's one certain, which you can include a common core for math, and next standards of science, next generation standards in science, and all the and present the whole and guide the student one by one, the whole class now, and they allow them to talk in between. And it says, okay, it shows in the simulation how it's being done and explain. The student have a time to learn and see, okay, I did this wrong. Why did I do it wrong? And also, I have a students is given a sheet where they have to actually write down what the attempt was, what was the problem, what is their new understanding, about what it was done.
Yeah.
I finally, the time I used that, it had been very, because even the slowest student always wants to use that, always want to, and there is another strategy that is called the multiple option questions, which is actually very clever. So there is many approaches.
No, there are, but the difference between individual learning, at the end of the day, what we're saying here is we have to assess each student individually. That student is going to go who knows where. And so the question is, have you mastered this or mastered that? In other words, we're looking to say we have to treat fourth grade math the way you would treat the bar exam for lawyers. That there's a third party that says, okay, this is what you're supposed to know. Do you know it here? Now, how you got there, I'm perfectly fine with what you said and how you get there. The problem that we get is if you take 20 people, and especially if you take 20 people from, let's say, the cities where we have this low achievement, and you take 20 students and you try to go and do something like that with a group, and now you give them all the exam at the end of the time, the odds are you're going to get very varied results from on the exams because students learn at different paces. Even if they did the exact same thing, they may not have the same level of knowledge at the end of the day. And so our problem is when we go to say, let's do the next thing, let's learn the next lesson. If you cannot learn how to do long division, if you do not know how to do multiplication and subtraction, those are prerequisite knowledge to be able to successfully do a long division problem. So we've got to find a way that the individual, now as they do the lesson, you want to do the lessons in a group thing, but then you need to go and bring people that are in the same place. If you start off and just say to everybody, okay, for example, taking the example of Khan Academy, we got a whole bunch of people that are right now in the fourth grade. They're going to start the fourth grade. And we say, fine, you're going to start off with the kindergarten here. You work your way through. those people in that class, they have all different holes in their knowledge. And especially if we get down to, as I say, the lower socioeconomic classes where they have such varied backgrounds on this, we have to have a way that they can progress from what they know through what they don't know. And so if we can do it, but I think here that the time it will take to work your way through 450 learning units, which is typical of math. And by the way, they have the same thing for sciences and so forth. That's a little bit the issue. I hope that makes sense, Kurt.
Yeah, really quickly, I get to go off and make some
Yeah.
peace around. So I thought I'd send the love out to the world through the peace salute and see the world as it is. It's all love. And when we send it out, it creates peace. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all being here,
Thank you.
doing the work you do. Especially, Bill, you're such an inspiration. And that's why you have so many people running around you.
Thank you for that. But the thing about it is I feed off all the energy from all of you and your participation. So I really appreciate it here, and I don't want anybody to feel, we learn the most when somebody comes up and has a different opinion on something. That's the only time we really learn. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate here when anybody has thoughts. I don't want people to be just following whatever I say because I don't learn anything that way.
Agreed. And you've
Okay.
heard me talk back at you
Thank,
too.
thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to wrap this up here real quick. I just want to say a little bit of something. I'm hoping we can go and create some pilot projects in different parts of the world. We have to look, when does the school year begin? And there's a strategy because it's so difficult. If you go to a school and say, "Hey, I got a good idea. Let's get rid of the school year idea. We're just not going to have a school year. Let's make it so that teachers can take vacation whenever they want. Let's make it so that students can take vacation. We won't have fixed times for vacation. You get to take 20 days off a year whenever you want. Teacher, you can take them off whenever you want, as long as there's enough teachers there, because since no teacher is teaching a subject anymore, teachers are only teaching how to learn. So they're all teaching the same thing. So every teacher is switchable to every other teacher here. So as long as there's enough teacher to be able to follow the alerts as to who needs help and guidance and so forth, how to do that. Oh, I want to add one more thing. If we're looking at teachers to be the mentor coaches, and the system is helping them identify which students need help, where interventions are needed, we can go and have another layer. So we have a layer of mentor coaches to the mentor coaches, so that if we see that one teacher, that their students are progressing a lot slower on average than the other teachers around them, then we will take a closer look to see if we can identify some way that we can intervene with that teacher coach to help them be more effective in helping their students. So this idea of a hierarchy of mentor coaches to mentor coaches. But still, to go to a school and say, well, a couple of things we suggest you change. Change your testing idea so you test every month all year through, and the students can take tests whenever they think they're ready, and they can take tests as often as they need to pass, and nobody's allowed to go on to another level until they have mastered the previous levels, all prerequisite levels. And teachers won't be giving instruction anymore, and they're not going to be responsible for assessment anymore. And you go and say that to schools, schools are going to say, get lost. You're not going to get a positive reception in schools by and large. So we're looking here to be able to create a competition, to be able to, we're looking to pull the mass media, newspapers, TV, the education journalists of all the mass media together, point out that the fact that the system has been failing, that we have these schools that for decades have failed to educate their students. And the result of that is total poverty, because when those students grow up, they can't get jobs, high crime, and all these negatives that come out of that. and the fact that there's no plan. And we have 136 schools in New Jersey in that bottom 10% of primary schools. So we are looking to go maybe get a couple of businesses to offer incentives. Those incentives might be that they'll provide the schools with some extra stuff. Maybe they'll offer some scholarships, whatever. And maybe we'll go to the state university and say, hey, if students complete the whole program. But for the pilot on the fourth grade, we might be able to get some banks or some other local companies to offer some incentives to the schools that participate, first of all, and second of all, to schools that achieve that goal of at least 70% or even 50%, because 50% is still better than the state average. So then we go out and say there's a competition. If you want to be part of this study, this pilot, well, before we do that, we are looking to go to fourth grade teachers and have those teachers say, okay, what do you need? What is the direct cause of your not being able to get your students to be at grade level? Number one. Number two, how could you get your students to grade level if you are not allowed to approach the family? You're not allowed to ask for more resources. In other words, that you have to succeed even if they're not prepared. You have to succeed even if they don't come to school on a regular basis, and you have to succeed even if they won't do any homework. So how can you do that? And we believe that when teachers sit down and have to answer these questions this way, they will come to that conclusion of what the teachers' colleges are already saying, that we need to get to a personalized education, because the variances and where students are at, as I say, middle-class neighborhoods, the students are more or less all at the same place. But in lower class neighborhoods, the students are all over the map. They're not at the same place. So that they would come to the conclusion, we have to get to the personalized, and then you could even get them to say, well, what are we going to do about the time? What are we going to do about the schedule? And get them to conclude that we need these features that we've just been describing. That's what we need to be successful. And then be able to go and say, fine, if you want to participate in the pilot, you have to get your superintendent of schools, your school board, all your school administrators and the principal, all your fourth grade teachers, and as many parents of the students who will be in the fourth grade next year, and as many of the students themselves that will be in the fourth grade. Whatever schools can get the higher percentages of each of these stakeholder groups to pledge that they will do everything they can to achieve the goal. Those 10 schools with the highest commitment level, if you would be selected for the pilot. So make it so that they already are considered exceptional by their willingness to do something to try to make a difference. And having the media just blasting constantly this attempt to do the unheard of, to do what most people, that's impossible. You can't take schools that for 10 years or more have never gotten to 10% of students at grade level, and you're going to get them to be higher than the state average in 1 year. It's crazy. It's impossible. You can't do it. And the very fact that there are people saying, we think we can do it, we're going to try, is going to get them tremendous publicity. So we want to definitely approach that. We want to approach some famous people, some basketball players, football players, celebrities, who will then go to these first help in the advertising to get schools and students and parents to try to win one of those 10 pilots slots. But then once we've got the school, to go into that school and become the cheerleaders, to perhaps get some celebrities or the mayor or some other people that have a high profile in these communities to be the cheerleaders, the head cheerleaders, cheering the schools and the kids on. With this combination of things and having the mentor coaches to the mentor coaches, we believe we can do this. Now, just imagine if a year later, we're able to say, look at that. We took schools that have not been able to get to 10% of students at grade level in 10 years, and we got them to 70% of students at grade level at way above, almost 1.5 times the average for the state in 1 year. Just imagine the publicity. And this is why the media is going to love to say, I want to track this, because if you do this, this is a media sensation if you can achieve that. So those are parts of our strategy. So what are your guys' thoughts on everything I said, using Khan Academy, and going to Khan Academy, by the way, and saying, hey, we want you to advise us, to give us the extra help to make sure this is available. And it's available in more than 40 languages around the world. I think Swahili is included, of course, Spanish and French and all those languages are there. I don't know. I was talking to some people that were working on Urdu, an Urdu version. Anyway, so thoughts on the whole idea of doing a pilot on this, and where might there be interest in trying to have a pilot like that in your area?
I am all for it, Bill. The thing is, when do we start it and how? I mean, I already written a comprehensive kindergarten through 12th grade educational program that includes everything that I've been talking about right now. It's already written for me. I mean, spell it out step by step. The thing for me is, when do we start it? How do we start it? Who do we meet in to get it done? And I don't like the politics and the idea about having actors, players writing, or maybe making a commercial. I like it a lot, and maybe they can do it in Spanish, or they can do it in translated in different languages.
Definitely want to do it. When does the school year begin in Costa Rica?
The private school is the same as in the U.S., but the public school is from February to November. By the early November, it's almost, the class is finished.
No, this takes about a half year to set up, and the reason for that is because you have to get the commitments. We got to get the teachers on board and all the school administrators on board. We need to make sure that we're selecting schools that are among the worst schools currently. But again, it cannot be a school that's worse because they don't have facilities. We can't fix the access. We might be able to, but we would have to, for example, be able to have enough devices so that all fourth graders would be able to have access to the device at least an hour a day, and per school day. Because that's
and this is, I assume this is at one point this has to be person. I have to be in person there. So there are some schools that are very out. I mean, that is very difficult for me to reach. So the zone or the location is also something that we have to think about. The thing that we need to prove is the point that we can reach low achievers and bring it up to grade level. That's the point that we need to make. Where this is done, it doesn't matter. Where is, because I would like to, be present in some of them, or just check in that we're progressing, that we're not stagnant, that we're just, we're gonna have a project that it fails, not because it wasn't implemented, it wasn't followed, it wasn't.
Exactly. This is critical because Khan Academy, I'm estimating 95% of teachers that use Khan Academy do not go and make the full commitment. So they do not accept that students learn at their own pace. So they assign the students, okay, tomorrow you're going to do lesson 193 of Khan Academy. And so everybody's expected to do that night or during the next day. But the problem is that not every student has mastered all the prerequisites. So that's why these fail. There's a handful of schools only where the teacher has managed to be able to get the authority to say, I'm going to send all my children back to kindergarten. I'm going to take all my sixth graders and have them start off at kindergarten again. So this is why we have to get the teachers, we have to get the education community to recognize that this is an approach that can work, that can overcome the major problems. Because otherwise, if we have teachers that are just saying, no, 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 the politicians have to go fix the social problems and poverty problems first, then we'll go and work on the education problems. If you have teachers like that, it doesn't help. That you're not going to be able to accomplish anything because they're not willing to do something different, because we cannot have a dependency on solving poverty and social issues to make the education dependent on that. So it takes time to line that up. But we've worked out outlines where we've got a bunch of papers that literally describe, here's step by step how we're going to get the teachers on board. Here's the surveys and the survey questions that we want to go out to teachers to have them explore what the problems and the solutions. We've got descriptions for the competitions. We've got descriptions to go and recruit the media, to get the media on board so that they make the whole idea of trying to go and make the improvement a big deal. A big
Okay, Bill, the point that we need to make is this is a pilot program. A pilot is something different. A pilot is not a little step about something that is not working. That's the reason why something is not working is because whatever they're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Let's base it. So if you do something right, you should have the results that are right.
Correct.
If the students are failing, if the schools are failing, the teacher doesn't even have an authority to say, no, don't change my student. Your teaching approach sucks, fails. It doesn't prove anything.
Yeah.
So if there is if there is a pilot, we have to be very aggressive in our thinking, because if we say we're going to implement it this way, we should not give the authority anybody like a teacher saying, oh no, don't do that, don't change that for me, because it's a waste of my time.
No, that's why I said the competition is what school can get all of their teachers to pledge that they're going to follow the pilot plan. In other words, if you're not going to follow the pilot plan, you don't qualify to be part of the pilot. So there's the process to go through, because a lot of schools are just saying, hey, that's the way it is. Don't blame me. As long as I'm not worse than the last year, hey, you can't hold me responsible for anything. That expectation, that mindset has to change. And to do that, we've got to show schools and teachers, hey, wow, can you imagine how great a hero you would be if you can accomplish this? If you could show that you went from 10% of students at grade level to over 70% of students at grade level in a year, can you imagine what that's going to do for your reputation? Can you imagine what that's going to do for your school's reputation? So that we get that commitment to make change. Because if this is successful, then in the next year, what do you think is going to happen to a teacher who's still at 10%, or a school that's still at 10%, but is not implementing any of the measures that caused this great jump in achievement? Those schools officials, there's going to be all kinds of people looking at them and saying, we see these other schools around us all making this quantum leap in achievement, and you're not. Why not? What are you doing here? And what is your plan to be able to match the achievement of all these other schools? Because if you don't have a plan, then maybe we need to replace you. We have to have administrators and teachers recognizing a new level of expectation for their jobs. And that's going to cause the shift. If we can show we can go from 10% to 70% in 1 year, there's going to be intense pressure on all the other schools that are at the 10 and 20% level to also improve. Whether they improve the way we did it or not is immaterial. But the new expectation is, no, a 10 or 20, 30% grade level rate in a school is no longer acceptable. And that's part of the psychology, if you would, of our approach. So I will send out here, I'm going to take this presentation here, but I'm also going to send out these documents that we've created talking about how do we get the right schools for the pilot, because you don't want to take on a school where half the teachers are only half committed, the school officials are not fully committed, and nobody's explained to the parents, so the parents don't know or they're not supportive of it. And we're not asking the parents that they have to do anything, but we're asking the parents to be cheerleaders for the whole concept, if you would. And
also, Bill, I am all for no homework.
Yes.
Because usually when a homework is sent home, the parents doesn't even know what the student is learning, and some of them, they don't even care. I mean, and actually, and the student just taking something home is for them is extra work.
Yeah.
So let them say, okay, there is no homework for 1 year.
Well, I think the idea is there's no mandatory homework, because homework disadvantages the already disadvantaged kids. The kids who do not have a home environment that's conducive to learning, they're doubly disadvantaged, because the school is saying, hey, homework time is part of our school year, if you would. But if a student can't do the homework time, they're now doubly disadvantaged. So yes, if a student wants to do extra work at home, we don't stop them. And especially if they've got the connectivity and device and so forth that they can, great. But a student that does not have that doesn't make any difference, because they're always picking up where they are personally at, not dependent where their classmates are at. But I agree with Kurt's idea that we can put in extra incentives to have students help their weaker classmates from the perspective of that raises the prestige or raises some incentives for the entire class. And it doesn't make any difference if students are some students are at the second grade level, and some students are at the fourth grade level, and some students are at the sixth grade level. You're in a class based on age, not based on where you're at in your academic learning.
And also for this type of schools that are underperforming schools, usually there is one issue with the teachers is they like the students to be quiet, and quiet is no longer a way of teaching.
100%.
Because now we have, look at, it's called three-dimensional teaching, which is basically three-dimensional learning as students talk with among themselves, they collaborate. A busy class is a learning environment.
Exactly.
And some of these underperforming schools, they like everybody to be silent, which is totally outdated.
Yeah, but that's all part of the whole concept that the teacher's in charge. Students are supposed to stay quiet and only listen to the teacher, and the teacher's in charge. And the idea that the students are in charge of their own learning and working at their own pace is many teachers who are control oriented, they freak out at that idea. That's why it's very important to show those teachers, here is your new working style of being the observer from the side, and you're intervening on individual cases as warranted, as needed. So that they don't feel, oh, they took away my job, but now I'm sitting here and I don't have a job. We go and help their students be successful, because then they're the heroes. They're the heroes if they are out there and they're seeing their students succeed. When I traveled around the country, the one thing that I saw that teachers get intense pleasure of having their students be successful. Teachers love it when a student 20 years later or 10 years later comes back to the school and says, thank you so much, you changed my life. And that's what the mentor coaching is all about. Most people can remember a teacher who had strong influence in their life. And it usually was not because that teacher was great in biology or chemistry or any particular subject. It was because that teacher took interest in them as a person. And so this is what we're doing. We're creating space for the teachers to be that mentor coach to the student, to helping that student become tremendously successful. Nobody wants to be the coach of the losing team. So we need to be able to help the coaches be able to go out there and grow a whole generation of winners. anyway, that was the basic goal for today, to go through those, and I did that in not the orderly fashion I wish I would have been able to do, but I hope I got across the idea that we are not going to be able to dramatically change the results if we keep basing on the idea of teacher-driven education, because that runs counter to the idea of creating independent learners. And we're not going to be able to solve it in maintaining the idea of a calendar-driven, schedule-driven education, because not everybody can learn at the same pace. And we've got to enable every individual student to proceed at their best pace, the pace that is going to enable them to master. We've got to get mastery based, because then we don't have students graduating or reaching levels where they have all kinds of holes in their prior knowledge that are going to limit their ability to learn the next items. We have to make sure that everybody's got rock solid foundations in all the stuff they've learned up to a certain point. So with that, I thank you, those of you that has stuck it out to the end here. And I will be sending out some further information here in the next couple of days. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. See you next week.
Yes. See you then. Bye now.